Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves journeying across the vast windswept landscapes of Mongolia, not to witness the thundering hordes of Genghis Khan in their prime, although their echoes certainly linger, but to listen instead to the much quieter, more melancholic, and often deeply enigmatic tales, whispered by the silent stones and shifting sands of its many deserted settlements. Imagine an endless expanse of steppe rolling towards a distant, hazy horizon, all under a sky so immense and deeply blue, it feels like you could fall right into it. The wind, a constant companion here, sighs through the tall, hardy grasses, carrying with it the faint, dry scent of wild thyme, the earthy aroma of grazing herds, and the almost palpable dust of ages. Here and there, a crumbling earthwork, a scatter of ancient weathered pottery shards, or the barely discernible circular outline of a long-vanished nomadic encampment, hints at lives lived great Khans who ruled, and entire empires that rose from this very earth only to eventually fade back into its embrace. Honestly, between the sheer, sometimes overwhelming emptiness of the steppe, the subtle but potent ghosts of so many forgotten peoples, and the very real possibility of stumbling upon an unexpectedly grumpy and rather territorial marmot, defending its ancient burrow complex. If you were to wander out here looking for these lost tales entirely on your own, you'd probably get profoundly, magnificently lost. Perhaps a little bit spooked by the profound silence, and possibly outmaneuvered by the local wildlife long before you uncovered your first truly significant archaeological clue. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It always means a lot to hear from you, so feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first impression as you step out, metaphorically speaking, onto the Mongolian steppe is one of almost overwhelming scale. The land stretches in every direction, a vast undulating ocean of grass, punctuated by distant blue-tinged mountains or the occasional stark beauty of a rocky outcrop. The silence when the ever-present wind momentarily dies down is profound, a silence that seems to hold the weight of centuries of millennia. This is a landscape that has been a stage for some of history's most dramatic human endeavors, a veritable highway for countless nomadic peoples, and the heartland of empires that once stretched across continents. A mainstream historical fact, of course, is that the Mongolian steppe served as the cradle for numerous powerful nomadic polities throughout history, including the Xiongnu, who famously troubled Han Dynasty China, the various Turkic khaganates, who left behind enigmatic stone inscriptions, and most renowned of all, the Mongol Empire forged by Genghis Khan, and his successors, which at its zenith was the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. But empires, even those seemingly as indomitable as the Mongols, eventually recede. Capitals are abandoned, trade routes shift, climates change, and people move on, leaving behind them the silent witnesses to their former presence. And it's these deserted settlements, these whispers in stone and earth, that we are seeking tonight. When you think of settlements in a Mongolian context, you mustn't always picture towering stone cities in the style of, say, ancient Rome or Mesoamerica, though some more substantial urban centers certainly did exist at various times, like the fabled Karakorum. More often, especially for the earlier nomadic cultures, a settlement might have been a seasonal encampment, a place where families gathered with their herds for a few months, leaving behind only the faintest traces, perhaps a scatter of hearthstones, some broken pottery or subtle changes in the soil. Or it might be a more fortified administrative center, an earthen rampart surrounding a Khan's winter palace, or a sacred burial ground marked by impressive stone mounds or intricately carved deer stones. Later, with the spread of Buddhism, it could be the evocative ruins of once grand monasteries, their prayer halls now open to the sky, their painted murals fading under the harsh sun and biting winds. The tales of time these places tell are not always inscribed in neatly written chronicles. Often they are more subtle, carried on those very steppe winds that have eroded the ancient walls and scattered the dust of forgotten campfires. You hear these tales in the way the light falls on a crumbling watchtower at sunset, in the curve of an ancient earthwork barely visible beneath the waving grass and the glint of a tiny turquoise bead, found half buried in the sand or in the profound, almost sorrowful silence that envelops a once bustling city now reclaimed by the wild. It takes a keen eye, a patient heart, and a touch of imagination guided by the careful work of archaeologists to begin to decipher these stories. Forget bustling tourist traps with souvenir stands at every corner. Many of these ancient Mongolian sites are more of a bring-your-own thermos of hot tea, a very, very warm hat, a good pair of binoculars, and a profound appreciation for vast, beautiful emptiness punctuated by the occasional deeply enigmatic ancient rock pile. Kind of experience. A quirky and rather insightful tidbit is the way that contemporary Mongolian nomads who still live in close harmony with this ancient landscape sometimes possess an intuitive sense or an oral tradition, however fragmented about certain ancient places. Classes, they might refer to a particular cluster of ruins as the Old City or the place of the ancestors, treating it with a mixture of respect, awe, and perhaps a touch of superstitious avoidance, perhaps never camping too close, or being careful not to disturb the stones, even if the precise history or the names of the people who once lived there have long since faded from explicit memory. Archaeologists and historians, of course, bring their own tools to bear, trying to piece together the puzzle. They still engage in considerable debate, for example, regarding the exact nature and extent of sedentarization versus true mobility for many of these ancient steppe empires. How permanent were their capitals or administrative centers really intended to be? And how did these morphic settlements actually function within the broader context of their predominantly pastoral nomadic economies? Their seasonal migrations with vast herds and their unique political structures that often relied on personal loyalties and swift horse-mounted communication across immense distances. But what is undeniable is that each of these deserted settlements, from the faintest trace of a Xiongnu campsite to the more substantial crumbling walls of a later Buddhist monastery, is a tangible link to the past. They are poignant reminders of the constant ebb and flow of human history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the enduring power of nature to reclaim what was once hers, and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit to adapt, to build, and to create meaning, even in the harshest of environments. So as you stand now in your mind's eye on this vast Mongolian plain, with the wind whipping at your face and the immense sky arching overhead, prepare to listen. The steppe winds and the silent stones have many tales to tell, tales of forgotten peoples, of mighty khans, of sacred rituals, of daily struggles, and of the slow, inexorable passage of time. It's a journey into a world where history is not just found in books, but is etched into the very earth beneath your feet, waiting to be rediscovered. The steppe winds, as you've now begun to feel in your imagination, are indeed the great storytellers of Mongolia, whispering across silent stones and vast empty plains where empires once rose and just as dramatically fell. But before the Khans built their fabled capitals, before even the Xiongnu raised their earthen forts, these immense grasslands were home to countless generations of even earlier people's nomadic pastoralists, whose lives were a constant dance with the seasons, their settlements as ephemeral as the summer clouds, yet whose faint echoes still resonate if you know how and where to listen. Understanding their way of life is the first step in deciphering the oldest tales these deserted lands have to tell. Imagine a world without permanent cities, without stone-built houses or fortified walls, at least not in the way later, more sedentary cultures would define them. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological evidence for early nomadic pastoralism across the Mongolian steppes and the broader Central Asian heartland dates back thousands of years, certainly to the Bronze Age, from around 3000 BCE onwards, and likely even earlier in its incipient forms. These were peoples whose entire existence revolved around their herds, hardy horses that were their transport, and companions, sheep and goats that provided milk meat and warm fleeces. Perhaps some cattle or yaks, depending on the region, and later, the indispensable Bactrian camels for longer journeys. Their settlements, therefore, were not fixed points on a map, but rather a series of temporary campsites chosen for their access to good pasture and fresh water occupied for a season, and then abandoned as the herds and the people moved on. Their version of leaving a forwarding address when they packed up their felt gurs and moved camp was probably just the wind itself knowing their general direction, and perhaps a few strategically, if unintentionally, misplaced goat droppings for future very patient archaeologists to ponder and meticulously catalog. Because they're dwellings, likely early forms of the GER or yurt, or perhaps simpler skin tents or brushwood shelters, were designed to be portable and to leave a light footprint on the land. Finding the exact location of a specific ancient nomadic campsite can be an immense archaeological challenge. There are no towering ruins to guide you, no crumbling city walls breaking the horizon. Instead, you are looking for far more subtle traces. The faint whispers left by lives lived in constant motion. Forget finding a grand ruined castle complex for these very early folks. You, as a seeker of their stories, are far more likely to get incredibly excited about discovering a slightly discolored, circular patch of earth that just faintly screams, "Someone definitely pitched a very comfortable, if temporary, felt-covered dwelling right here around 1500 BC, and possibly had a really good, if somewhat smoky, barbecue just outside the door." So what are these traceable echoes that these ancient nomads left behind? One of the most common and often most informative is the hearth, the central fire pit. These might be marked by a ring of fire-cracked stones, a lens of ash and charcoal embedded in the soil, or even just a patch of earth hardened and reddened by repeated fires. Around these hearths, the life of the encampment would have revolved. Cooking warmth, storytelling, social gathering. Finding a hearth is like finding the very heart of a lost nomadic home. Scattered around these hearth areas, or perhaps in designated refuse spots nearby, archaeologists might find fragments of everyday life pieces of simple, often utilitarian pottery, perhaps with distinctive cord-marked or incised decorations that can help identify the culture and the period. There might be stone tools, flint scrapers used for preparing hides, sharp flakes for cutting, grinding stones for processing wild seeds or grains, if they supplemented their pastoral diet, and perhaps broken arrowheads or spear points from hunting or defense. Bone tools like awls or needles might also survive. And of course, there would be animal bones, the remains of their meals, which when carefully analyzed can tell us what kinds of animals they were herding, what they were hunting, and even the season in which the camp was occupied. Sometimes the only sign of a former encampment might be a very subtle change in the soil composition. Perhaps an area slightly more compacted where a gyre once stood, or a patch of ground subtly enriched by organic waste over a period of occupation. A quirky and rather clever way that archaeologists sometimes detect these incredibly faint traces of ancient, long-buried nomadic campsites or animal corrals is by observing the landscape at very specific times of day when the low angle of the rising or setting sun casts subtle shadow marks across the steppe, revealing almost imperceptible dips or rises in the ground that hint at former human activity. Or they might use aerial or satellite imagery taken after a light snowfall where the snow melts unevenly over areas once disturbed by human habitation, briefly outlining forgotten features before vanishing again. While their living sites were ephemeral, their burial sites were often more permanent and visible, intended to be lasting memorials. Across the steppes, you might find ancient kurgans, burial mounds of earth, and stone slab graves marked by upright stones or the famous deer stones, beautiful stelae carved with flying deer and other symbols often associated with Bronze Age cultures. These burial sites, sometimes containing grave goods like bronze weapons, horse trappings, or simple jewelry, offer profound insights into their beliefs about the afterlife, their social structures, and their artistic traditions, even if the exact locations of the campsites of the people buried there remain elusive. Archaeologists and paleo-environmental scientists continue to engage in considerable debate regarding the precise timing, the specific environmental triggers, and the complex socio-economic factors that led to the initial large-scale adoption and widespread flourishing of pastoral nomadism as the dominant and most successful human subsistence strategy across the vast grasslands of the eastern steppe. Was it primarily a highly adaptive response to increasing aridity and changing climatic conditions that made settled agriculture more precarious in certain regions? Was its development spurred by crucial technological innovations like the domestication of the horse and the advent of horseback riding, which allowed for greater mobility and the management of larger herds? Or was it driven more by evolving social and political dynamics between different groups, perhaps as a way to exploit new ecological niches or to gain an advantage in intertribal competition and warfare? What is certain is that these ancient nomads were masters of their environment. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the steppes, the patterns of rainfall, the best grazing lands for each season, the migration routes of wild game, the locations of reliable water sources. Their lives were a testament to resilience, adaptability, and a profound connection to the vast open landscapes they called home. It's like they were the original masters of minimalist living and sustainable resource management, leaving behind just enough subtle clues for us to know they were there, enriching the land with their presence, but not so much that it would permanently clutter up the pristine, sweeping beauty of their immense grassy real estate. And so, as you stand on the Mongolian steppe, the wind whispering around you, you realize that the deserted settlements here are not always about crumbling walls or grand ruins. Sometimes they are about these faintest of echoes, these subtle signs in the earth. These whispers of lives lived in constant motion, a testament to the enduring human spirit and its ability to thrive, leaving its indelible, if almost invisible, mark upon the timeless tapestry of the land. The faint, almost ghostly traces left by those earliest nomadic pastoralists on the Mongolian steppe, the subtle discolorations in the soil or the scattered fragments of ancient pottery around a long, cold hearth, as you've now pictured, offer us fleeting but precious glimpses into a way of life lived in constant motion, in deep harmony with the rhythms of the vast grasslands. These were the foundational cultures, the first to truly master this challenging environment. But as the centuries turned, new powers began to coalesce on these same steppes. Larger confederations of nomadic peoples who, while still deeply rooted in a mobile lifestyle, also began to establish more substantial, more visible, and ultimately more enduring, at least in their ruined form, settlements. And among the earliest and most formidable of these were the Xiongnu, whose lost strongholds, now just weathered earthen ramparts under the immense Mongolian sky, still whisper tales of a powerful empire that once challenged even the mighty Han dynasty of China. A mainstream historical fact is that the Xiongnu were a vast and influential tribal confederation, or perhaps even a nascent state composed of diverse nomadic groups who flourished on the steppes north of China from roughly the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. For centuries, they were the dominant power in Inner Asia, their skilled horse archers a constant threat to the northern borders of China, prompting the Han emperors to expend enormous resources on defense diplomacy, and even the construction and reinforcement of sections of what would later become known as the Great Wall. Their border disputes with Han Dynasty China were truly legendary. It's like history's longest, most dramatic, and incredibly high-stakes "get off my meticulously cultivated agricultural lawn" versus "actually this vast grassy bit is rather good for our horses and we were here for" sort of argument, but involving entire armies, intricate diplomatic maneuvers, and the occasional construction of very, very, very long defensive walls. Now, while the Xiongnu were fundamentally a nomadic people, their society was far more complex and organized than that of earlier, smaller pastoral groups. They had a sophisticated political hierarchy with a supreme ruler known as the Chanyu or Shanyu, and a complex system of tribal allegiances. And as their power grew, they began to establish more permanent or semi-permanent centers. Not bustling cities of stone in the Greco-Roman, or Chinese mold perhaps, but significant fortified settlements that served as administrative hubs, winter encampments, places to store wealth and tribute, and defensive strongholds. So the Xiongnu weren't just randomly wandering the steppe hoping for the best. They were actually building rather serious, if somewhat earthy, fortified administrative centers that were basically the ancient nomadic equivalent of a very large, strategically placed and surprisingly well-organized gated community, but with significantly more horses, a distinct lack of a communal swimming pool, and probably fewer passive-aggressive arguments about whose turn it was to mow the vast communal pasture. As you, the seeker of lost tales, venture across the landscapes where the Xiongnu once held sway, perhaps in southern Siberia or across the steppes of modern-day Mongolia, you might encounter the subtle but impressive remnants of these lost strongholds. They often appear today as large rectangular or square enclosures. Their walls formed not of stone but of massive rammed earth or layers of sun-dried mud brick, now weathered and eroded by centuries of wind, rain, and frost into softened grassy mounds. Some of these fortified sites, like the famous Volga settlement near Lake Baikal or various sites in Mongolia, such as Terelgin Dorvalgin, could be quite extensive, sometimes covering many hectares, and were often strategically located near rivers or in defensible positions. They might have been further protected by ditches or moats, the faint traces of which can still sometimes be discerned. Archaeological excavations at these Xiongnu sites have unearthed a wealth of information painting a picture of a surprisingly sophisticated and interconnected society. Within the enclosures of these earthen forts, archaeologists have found evidence of dwellings, perhaps substantial jurors or more permanent wooden structures, storage pits, workshops for metalworking and pottery production, and even some signs of limited agriculture, suggesting that while pastoralism was paramount, their economy was more diverse than once thought. The pottery found is often distinctive with its own characteristic shapes, and sometimes simple in sized or stamped decorations. Bronze and iron artifacts are common. Arrowheads, daggers, swords, parts of armor, and especially intricate horse trappings and belt buckles, often adorned with the dynamic animal-style art. So characteristic of steppe cultures featuring stylized depictions of fighting animals, stags, or mythical creatures, one of the most striking aspects of Xiongnu archaeology is their elite burial sites. The Chanyus and other high-ranking nobles were often interred in elaborate, log-lined tombs, sometimes accompanied by sacrificed horses, chariots, and a dazzling array of grave goods. These can include objects of gold and silver jade lacquerware and fine silk textiles imported from Han China, obtained either through trade as tribute or as diplomatic gifts alongside locally produced felt carpets, wooden vessels, and personal adornments. Finding a Xiongnu elite burial is like hitting the archaeological jackpot, not just for the occasional glint of precious metal, though that's always a bonus for attracting research funding, but for the incredibly detailed and often beautifully preserved insights these finds offer into how these powerful steppe lords lived, road-fought, and perhaps even accessorized with some seriously stylish and probably rather status-symbolic bronze belt buckles featuring interlocked ibexes. A quirky and rather fascinating debate among scholars revolves around the exact ethnic and linguistic affiliation of the Xiongnu. While Chinese historical sources provide detailed accounts of their interactions with the Xiongnu themselves left no written records of their own language apart from a few personal names and titles transcribed into Chinese. Were they early Turkic speakers, Mongolic Yeniseian, or perhaps a unique linguistic group that has since vanished? This linguistic mystery adds another layer to their enigmatic presence on the steppes. Why did these strongholds eventually become deserted? The fortunes of nomadic empires were often as shifting as the sands. Internal power struggles within the Xiongnu Confederation, devastating defeats at the hands of an increasingly powerful Han dynasty, which actively sought to break Xiongnu power through military campaigns, and by fostering divisions among their tribe's pressure from other rising nomadic groups and perhaps even long-term climatic changes affecting pasture lands, all likely contributed to their eventual decline and dispersal by the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. Their earthen forts, no longer centers of power or population, were gradually abandoned, their walls slowly crumbling their interiors, filling with wind-blown dust until only these subtle softened outlines remained sleeping under the grass. Archaeologists and historians still engage in considerable debate regarding the precise function and the actual level of permanent year-round occupation of many of these Xiongnu earthen forts or cities. Bayits, were they primarily seasonal political or grand ritual gathering centers for a largely mobile pastoral population coming alive only at certain times of the year? Were they true administrative capitals with significant resident populations of craftsmen, officials, and their families? Or were they mainly defensive strongholds and logistical bases used more intensively during times of conflict or for controlling key trade routes and resource areas? Whatever their exact day-to-day function, these deserted Xiongnu strongholds, now just silent mounds and faint lines on the vast Mongolian steppe, tell a powerful tale of time. They speak of a formidable nomadic empire that for centuries shaped the history of Central and East Asia. A people who mastered the art of horse warfare built a complex society adapted to the harsh steppe environment. and left behind an archaeological legacy that continues to fascinate and challenge us, their ancient power still palpable in the wind that sighs over their lost and lonely earthen walls. The weathered earthen ramparts of those lost Xiongnu strongholds, as you've now imagined them, stand as silent grassy monuments to a powerful nomadic confederation that once held sway over vast swathes of the Mongolian steppe, their might a constant challenge to the empires of ancient China. But time, as it always does, moves on, and as the Xiongnu faded from the historical stage, new nomadic powers rose to dominate these endless grasslands. And among the most significant of these were the early Turkic Khaganates, who, while also living a life largely centered around their herds and their mobile encampments, left behind their own distinctive and often strikingly monumental tales of time etched in stone. Their impressive burial mounds or kurgans and their enigmatic memorial stelae often adorned with inscriptions that still speak to us across the centuries. Emerging in the 6th century CE, the Turkic Khaganates, the first Göktürk Empire and its successors, forged a vast nomadic empire that stretched from Manchuria to the Black Sea, controlling key sections of the Silk Road and playing a pivotal role in the geopolitics of Eurasia. A mainstream historical fact is that these early Turkic peoples, renowned for their horsemanship, their warrior ethos, and their sophisticated political organization, left behind a rich archaeological legacy, particularly in the Orkhon Valley of Mongolia and surrounding regions. While their everyday settlements might have been as ephemeral as those of earlier nomads, their burial and memorial sites for the elite, the khans, the nobles, the great warriors, were often built to last, designed to proclaim power, honor ancestors, and communicate with the divine. So when a truly great Turkic Khan, or a celebrated hero, passed from the world of the living, his obituary wasn't just a brief whispered eulogy around a campfire. It was often a grand, landscape-altering statement involving a massive stone and earth monument, a retinue of very loyal, if unfortunately, also deceased horses to accompany him to the afterlife, and possibly a long, impressive lineup of enigmatic stone guests who may or may not have been entirely thrilled to be part of the permanent memorial installation. As you wander in your mind's eye across these ancient Turkic sacred landscapes, one of the most prominent features you'd encounter would be the kurgan, or burial mound. These are often substantial structures, artificial hills of earth and piled stones, sometimes quite large and dominating the surrounding flat steppe, marking the final resting place of an important individual. Excavations of such kurgans, when they haven't been disturbed by later grave robbers, have revealed a wealth of information. Beneath the mound, a burial chamber, often lined with logs or stone slabs, would contain the deceased, usually interred with a fascinating array of grave goods deemed necessary or appropriate for their journey into and status within the afterlife. Crucially, for these horse-riding lords of the steppe, their beloved steeds often accompanied them in death. You might find the remains of one or more sacrificed horses, sometimes with their elaborate tack, saddles, bridles, stirrups, and decorative plaques, carefully placed within the burial or in an adjacent pit. Weapons, of course, were essential iron swords, daggers, composite bows, quivers filled with distinctive three-lobed arrowheads, and perhaps even lamellar armor. Personal adornments are also common, intricately crafted gold or silver belt buckles, a key status symbol, earrings, beads, and sometimes even imported luxury items like silk fragments or metal mirrors, testament to their connections with the wider Silk Road world. Feasting vessels, pottery jars that once held food and drink for the afterlife journey, complete the picture of a warrior elite whose vision of the next world clearly involved a continuation of their earthly pursuits and status. Often associated with these kurgans, or sometimes standing alone in designated memorial complexes, are the stone stelae. These are upright slabs of stone, sometimes roughly hewn, sometimes more carefully shaped and occasionally carved with depictions of human figures. Perhaps a stylized representation of the deceased noble, often shown holding a cup in one hand, a symbol of feasting or ritual. Some of the most remarkable of these stelae, particularly those from the later Turkic periods, like the Second Turkic Khaganate, bear lengthy inscriptions carved in the unique Old Turkic runic script, often called the Orkhon Yenisei script. These are invaluable historical documents, the earliest written records in any Turkic language, often recounting the glorious deeds, the lineage, the wisdom, and sometimes the laments of the Khans and heroes they commemorate. We'll delve deeper into these talking stones later, but for now, just imagine their silent, imposing presence on the open steppe. Their version of leaving a lasting legacy was less about endowing a library or a charitable foundation, and more about erecting a really impressive, very durable stone monument, possibly featuring a rather stern-looking carved stone selfie and an accompanying runic inscription that essentially declared, "I, Khan so-and-so, was exceptionally awesome. You're welcome." And honestly, you have to admire the directness and the sheer permanence of the sentiment. Another intriguing and somewhat enigmatic feature often found in these Turkic memorial complexes are long lines of simple, unworked, upright stones called balbals. These lines, sometimes stretching for hundreds of meters, typically lead eastward from a main kurgan or a stele. A quirky tidbit and a subject of much scholarly discussion is their precise meaning. One common theory is that each balbal stone represented an enemy warrior slain in battle by the deceased hero, commemorated at the site, a kind of tally of his martial prowess. Other interpretations suggest they might represent important followers, allies, or even ancestors of the deceased, or perhaps attendees at a grand funerary feast held in his honor. Or maybe they simply marked a sacred pathway guiding ritual processions, or the spirit's journey towards the rising sun. The orientation of these sites is often significant. Many Turkic memorial complexes and the carved faces on the stele are deliberately aligned towards the east, the direction of the sunrise, which held profound sacred meaning in their cosmology, likely associated with rebirth renewal and the supreme sky god Tengri. Archaeologists and philologists who study these fascinating remnants of the Turkic Kaganates still engage in considerable debate regarding the precise interpretation of many of the symbols and recurring motifs found on the memorial stele and within the grave goods of their kurgans. They explore the extent to which these artistic and ritual expressions represent a unified pan-Turkic cosmological system and set of beliefs versus reflecting more localized regional variations. Specific clan traditions or discernible influences from neighboring cultures such as the Sogdians, the Chinese, or earlier steppe peoples like the Xiongnu. What is undeniable as you contemplate these stone cairns and inscribed monuments scattered across the now deserted landscapes of the Orkhon Valley and beyond is that they speak powerfully of a proud and sophisticated nomadic civilization. They tell tales of mighty Khans who ruled vast territories, of a warrior elite whose lives were inextricably linked with their horses, of a people who possessed a rich spiritual life, a unique script, and a profound desire to commemorate their leaders and their achievements for posterity. Though the Turkic Khaganates themselves eventually fragmented and faded, their stone sentinels still stand, enduring witnesses to their time, their silent forms telling tales of a people who once thundered across the steppes, leaving their indelible mark upon the very landscape, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition, belief, and the timeless urge to carve one's story into stone. The stone cairns and inscribed stelae of those early Turkic Khans, as you've now envisioned them, stand as stark, enduring monuments on the vast Mongolian steppe. Silent testaments to their power, their beliefs, and their desire for eternal remembrance. They speak of a warrior aristocracy, of a life lived on horseback, and of a profound connection to the sky god Tengri. But the intricate tapestry of nomadic empires that rose and fell on these grasslands is woven with many different threads, and as you continue your journey through time, you encounter the legacy of another remarkable Turkic-speaking people who left behind a different kind of deserted settlement. The Uyghur Khaganate and the intriguing ruins of their once thriving, surprisingly settled cities. Emerging in the mid-8th century CE after the decline of the Second Turkic Khaganate, the Uyghurs established a powerful empire that for a time controlled significant portions of present-day Mongolia and surrounding regions. A mainstream historical fact that profoundly shaped their destiny and their material culture was their elite's conversion to Manichaeism in the 760s CE under Khagan Bogu. This sophisticated syncretic religion, originating in Persia and emphasizing a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, was a religion of the book with a literate priesthood, sacred texts, and a tradition of monasticism and settled community life. This adoption had a significant impact on the Uyghurs, who, while still retaining many nomadic traditions, began to build more substantial fortified urban centers, a departure from the more consistently mobile lifestyle of some of their Turkic predecessors. So the Uyghurs, it seems, decided that while the whole roaming the endless steppe with your trusty yurt and a sky full of stars lifestyle certainly had its undeniable charms, sometimes a city with actual defensible walls, a dedicated temple district for serene contemplation of the eternal battle between light and darkness, and maybe even some rudimentary urban planning, okay? Perhaps not full-blown zoning laws, but at least designated areas for things was a rather attractive upgrade, especially if you had a growing collection of very important Manichaean sacred texts that didn't particularly enjoy being repeatedly rained on. As you explore the remnants of these Uyghur settlements, you are stepping into places that once pulsed with a unique blend of steppe tradition and sophisticated urban culture. Perhaps the most famous of these is Kar Balgas, or Ordu Balik, city of the court or city of the army, which served as the grand capital of the Uyghur Steppe Empire. Imagine approaching its ruins in the Orkhon Valley, the same sacred valley that housed the memorials of earlier Turkic Khans. Even today, though, heavily eroded by time and the elements, the scale of Kar Balgas is impressive. You would see the vast crumbling outlines of its once formidable rammed earth walls, perhaps 10 meters high, or more, enclosing a substantial area. Within these walls, archaeologists have identified a citadel, likely housing the Kagan's palace complex, along with residential areas, artisan workshops, and crucially evidence of temples. Not just Manichaean, but also possibly Buddhist and Nestorian Christian, reflecting the Uyghurs' generally tolerant religious policies and their position at a crossroads of cultures. There are even signs of agricultural activity in the surrounding hinterlands, suggesting a degree of settled food production to support the urban population. Another even more enigmatic site sometimes associated with the Uyghur Khaganate is Porbajan, located on a remote island in a lake in what is now Tuva, Russia, just north of Mongolia. This remarkable structure, with its massive, well-preserved mud brick walls, forming a regular, almost palace-like or monastic layout, its precise function and even its exact attribution continue to be a subject of intense archaeological investigation. Its construction in such an isolated and logistically challenging location clearly required immense resources and a powerful centralized authority. Imagine their city planning meetings for Porbajin, right esteemed architects and royal soothsayers for the Kagan's new, well, whatever this magnificent island complex is going to be. We need exceptionally strong walls to keep out both unruly neighboring tribes and possibly any excessively curious lake monsters. We'll also need a very serene central courtyard for contemplating the cosmic struggle, several well-appointed chambers for the Manichaean elect to illuminate their texts, and crucially, a really good boat-building department to get all the supplies over here in the first place. What do these ruins of Uyghur cities tell us? They speak of a society undergoing a significant cultural transformation. The adoption of Manichaeism, with its emphasis on literacy scripture and organized religious communities, likely encouraged a more settled lifestyle, at least for a portion of the population, including the elite priests and artisans. These cities became centers for religious learning for the production of Manichaean texts. The Uyghurs adapted the Sogdian script to write their own Turkic language, creating the Uyghur script, which was later adopted by the Mongols, and for craft specialization, metalworking, textile production, and perhaps the creation of beautiful Manichaean illuminated manuscripts, fragments of which have been found in other Central Asian sites. A quirky and incredibly valuable tidbit from sites like Kar Balgas or from other areas influenced by the Uyghurs is the discovery of fragments of these Manichaean texts, or even stunning wall paintings from their temples. These often depict Manichaean deities, scenes from their complex cosmology of the battle between light and dark, or portraits of the elect in their distinctive white robes. Such finds offer precious direct insights into their spiritual beliefs and artistic traditions, a rare window into a religion that, despite its once vast spread, was later heavily persecuted and much of its heritage lost. These Uyghur cities were also vital nodes on the Silk Road, facilitating trade and cultural exchange between China, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The presence of diverse religious communities within them underscores their cosmopolitan nature. But this period of urban flourishing on the steppe was not destined to last indefinitely. The Uyghur Khaganate, like the empires before it, faced internal pressures and external threats. Around the year 840 CE, their steppe empire was decisively overthrown by an invasion of the Yenisei Kyrgyz, another Turkic people from further north. Kar-Balgus, their proud capital, was sacked and largely destroyed. Many of its inhabitants were killed or dispersed. The dream of a settled, Manichaean-influenced urban civilization on the Mongolian steppe suffered a devastating blow. However, the story of the Uyghurs didn't end there. Many migrated southwards into the Tarim Basin oases in present-day Xinjiang, China, where they established a new, vibrant, and remarkably enduring kingdom. The kingdom of Kocho, or Kocho, centered around cities like Turfan and Beshbalik. Here they gradually converted to Buddhism and played a crucial role for centuries more, as sophisticated traders, scholars, and cultural intermediaries. But their earlier steppe cities like Kar-Balgus were left to the mercy of the elements. Their earthen walls slowly crumbling, their once bustling streets gradually being reclaimed by the grass and the wind. Their faded glory becoming another layer in the deep, complex archaeological record of Mongolia. Archaeologists and historians still engage in considerable debate regarding the precise nature and extent of sedentarization within the Uyghur steppe empire. Was it a widespread societal shift or primarily confined to the ruling elite, the Manichaean clergy, and associated artisans and traders with the bulk of the population? Remaining largely nomadic pastoralists who merely used these cities as seasonal centers? And what was the exact interplay between their adopted Manichaean faith, their Turkic heritage, and the influences from Sogdian and Chinese cultures in shaping their unique urban experiment? As you stand in your mind before the windswept earthen ruins of what was once Kar-Balgus, you can almost hear the faint echoes of Manichaean hymns mingling with the calls of Turkic herdsmen, the chatter of Sogdian merchants, and the pronouncements of the Khagan. These deserted cities tell a poignant tale of time of a unique cultural fusion, of a bold attempt to build a different kind of civilization on the steppe, and of the eventual inevitable return of even the grandest human endeavors to the silence of the earth. The faded glory of those ancient Uyghur cities, with their crumbling earthen walls and whispers of a Manichaean faith that once flourished on the steppe, offers you a poignant glimpse into one of the many sophisticated cultures that rose and fell in the Orkhon Valley and beyond. But as you continue your journey through the deserted settlements of Mongolia, listening for their tales of time, you inevitably arrive at a name that resonates with a truly global, almost mythical power, Karakorum, the legendary and now largely vanished capital of the vast Mongol Empire. This was once envisioned as the very heart of a domain that stretched from Eastern Europe to the shores of the Pacific, a place where the Great Khan held court, and from which decrees that shaped the destiny of nations were issued. Today, it's mostly a ghost, its grandeur existing more in historical accounts and the imagination than in substantial standing ruins. Yet its tale is one of incredible ambition and the ephemeral nature of even the mightiest empires. The early 13th century, as you know, witnessed the meteoric rise of Chinggis Khan, or Genghis Khan, who forged the disparate Mongol tribes into an unstoppable military force and a unified nation, launching an era of conquest that would create the largest contiguous land empire in history. While Chinggis Khan himself maintained a largely mobile traditional nomadic headquarters, a kind of imperial ordu or encampment, it was his son and successor Ogedei Khan who in the 1230s truly began to develop Karakorum located in the sacred Orkhon Valley, a region already imbued with historical significance from the earlier Turkic Khaganates, as you'll recall, into a more substantial fixed imperial capital. A mainstream historical fact is that Karakorum, during its relatively brief heyday under Ogedei and his immediate successors in the mid-13th century, functioned as the political, administrative, and symbolic center of this colossal, world-spanning empire. It was from here that the Great Khans received tribute-dispatched envoys and oversaw the governance of their vast and diverse territories. So as you try to picture Karakorum in its prime around, say, the 1250s, when European travelers like the Franciscan friar William of Rubruck visited and left invaluable descriptions, you must imagine a place of fascinating contrasts. This wasn't a city of towering stone skyscrapers or marble-paved avenues in the style of ancient Rome or Constantinople, It was in many ways still a steppe capital reflecting its nomadic heritage, yet also a surprisingly cosmopolitan and bustling hub, a testament to the vast reach of the Mongol Imperium. Forget a sleepy little provincial town. Karakorum in its prime was probably the 13th century equivalent of an incredibly exclusive, slightly intimidating, and very international G20 summit, but held in a particularly scenic part of the Mongolian steppe, with a much higher chance of witnessing some truly impressive displays of archery and horsemanship during your lunch break. According to Rubruck and other accounts, the city was surrounded by substantial earthen walls, perhaps with 4 main gates. Within these walls, it wasn't a densely packed metropolis, but rather a collection of distinct quarters. There was, of course, the palace complex of the Great Khan, known as the Wanagong, or Palace of Myriad Peace, which, while likely built with Chinese architectural influences and craftsmanship, still retained elements that suited a Mongol ruler, perhaps with large courtyards for gatherings and space for numerous jurs or yurts to be erected. Then there were separate districts for different populations, one for the Muslim merchants and artisans who played a vital role in the empire's commerce and administration, another for the Chinese craftsmen, who were renowned for their skills in everything from silk weaving to metalwork, and perhaps most surprisingly for a city founded by nomadic warriors, Karakorum was a place of considerable religious diversity, reflecting the Mongols' generally pragmatic, if not always deeply theological tolerance for the various faiths practiced by their subject peoples. Rubruck describes 12 idol temples, likely Buddhist and possibly Taoist or local shamanistic shrines, 2 mosques for the Muslim inhabitants, and at the very extremity of the city, a Nestorian Christian church. This religious pluralism was a hallmark of the early Mongol Empire, which often sought to utilize the skills and knowledge of people from all backgrounds. But the most famous, almost legendary feature of Karakorum, vividly described by William of Rubruck, was the incredible silver tree fountain that stood in the courtyard of Ögedei Khan's palace. This, you simply have to imagine, was a truly astonishing piece of engineering and artistry, a testament to the Khan's wealth and his ability to command talent from across his empire. A quirky and absolutely fascinating tidbit is that this magnificent fountain was reportedly designed and built by a captured Parisian goldsmith named Guillaume Boucher. At the base of this life-size silver tree were 4 silver lion heads, and from the mouth of each lion gushed a different precious beverage. One flowed with pure wine, another with kumi's fermented mare's milk, a Mongol staple, a third with honey mead, and the 4th with rice wine. At the very top of the tree, a silver angel blew a trumpet, and when the angel sounded, its horn conduits would open, and these 4 distinct drinks would flow down into silver basins at the tree's foot, ready for the Khan's guests to imbibe. Forget your standard office water cooler or that slightly sad-looking punch bowl at a party. Ögedei Khan's palace had a gigantic, fully automated, self-pouring, multi-beverage dispensing silver tree. Talk about an impressive way to welcome international envoys visiting dignitaries, and perhaps even slightly intimidated local chieftains who had come to pay their respects and their tribute. However, Karakorum's reign as the supreme capital of the Mongol world was relatively short-lived. After Kublai Khan, a grandson of Chinggis, became Great Khan in 1260, he increasingly focused his attention on China, eventually establishing his new capital at Crumbling, modern-day Beijing, and founding the Yuan dynasty. While Karakorum remained an important regional center in Mongolia for some time, its political and economic significance gradually declined. It suffered damage during subsequent conflicts between different Mongol factions, and later in the late 14th century from invading Ming Dynasty Chinese forces. Over the centuries, the once bustling capital with its diverse population and its marvelous silver tree slowly faded. Its earthen walls eroded, its wooden palaces and temples decayed, or were dismantled for materials, and the relentless steppe grasses began to reclaim the site. Today, if you visit the area, you will find the impressive Erdene Zoo monastery built nearby in the 16th century, partly using stones and materials salvaged from the ruins of old Karakorum. Of the original Mongol capital itself, what remains visible on the surface are mostly subtle earthworks, scattered archaeological finds, and a few stone turtle steles that once marked important locations or edicts. Much of its story now lies buried beneath the soil, a true ghost capital. Archaeologists and historians still engage in considerable scholarly debate regarding the true physical scale, the estimated population size, and the overall level of urban sophistication and permanence of Karakorum during its brief but dazzling period as the Mongol imperial capital. Was it a truly monumental city comparable in structure and density to the established urban centers of sedentary civilizations like China or Persia? Or was it perhaps a more modest, if symbolically incredibly potent, administrative, ceremonial, and logistical center that still retained many of the fundamental characteristics of a traditional grand nomadic steppe encampment, albeit one with some impressive fixed structures and a remarkably international guest list? What is certain is that Karakorum, even in its present, largely vanished state, continues to exert a powerful hold on the imagination. It stands as a poignant symbol of the Mongol Empire's zenith, a place where the nomadic traditions of the steppe briefly intersected with the cultures and technologies of the wider Eurasian world, creating a unique, if ultimately transient, imperial dream. The steppe winds that now sigh over its almost invisible foundations seem to carry the faintest echoes of a time when this was the very center of the world. Its silent stones whispering tales of great khans, of global conquest, and of a legendary silver tree that once flowed with the drinks of an empire. The ghostly grandeur of Karakorum, that once bustling capital of the Mongol Empire, now mostly whispers its tales through the accounts of long-dead travelers and the subtle hints left in the Mongolian soil of the Orkhon Valley. But as you linger in this sacred heartland of steppe empires, you realize that Ogedei Khan's city was not the first major power to recognize the significance of this region. Journey further back in time with me about 5 centuries before the Mongols rose to global dominance to the 8th century CE. Here in this same valley, another powerful nomadic people, the rulers of the Second Turkic Khaganate, also left their indelible mark not primarily in the form of now vanished cities, but through imposing stone monuments that still speak to us today with an almost breathtaking clarity. The magnificent Orkhon inscriptions, stone stelae covered in ancient carved words that narrate tales of glory, offer stern advice and express profound lament. Imagine standing before one of these colossal stone pillars, perhaps the memorial to the great Turkic general Kul Tigan, or his brother, the wise ruler Bilge Kaghan. These aren't just random rocks. They are carefully erected monuments, often part of larger memorial complexes that might include sacrificial altars, lines of bulbal stones, as we discussed earlier, and perhaps even the remnants of a small surrounding wall or temple-like structure. A mainstream historical fact is that these Orkhon inscriptions discovered by scholars in the late 19th century and subsequently deciphered are some of the oldest and most extensive written records in any Turkic language. Carved in a unique runic-like script often called Gökturk script, or Orkhon Yenisei script, they provide invaluable first-hand accounts of the history, ideology, and cultural values of these early Turkic empires, offering a perspective that for centuries was largely known only through the often biased chronicles of their settled neighbors, particularly the Chinese. Forget a hastily scribbled battlefield report or diplomatic note that might get lost in transit. These Turkic Khans preferred to deliver their most important state of the empire addresses, their advice to future generations, and their personal eulogies for fallen heroes via gigantic, incredibly durable, and very publicly displayed stone monuments. Definitely harder to get your message accidentally deleted, or your pronouncements unfavorably ratioed when they're meticulously carved into several tons of prime Orkhon Valley granite. As your eyes trace the strange angular characters of the script, you are in a sense listening to voices from over 1,200 years ago. The content of these inscriptions is astonishingly rich and often deeply personal. They are not just dry lists of royal decrees. The Kul Tigan inscription, for instance, is a powerful eulogy by his brother Bilge Kaghan, recounting Kul Tigan's heroic deeds in countless battles, his unwavering loyalty, and his crucial role in strengthening the Turkic state. It speaks of campaigns fought of enemies, vanquished often named with a rather satisfying directness of lands conquered, and of the establishment of order among the disparate Turkic tribes. You can almost hear the clang of swords and the thunder of hooves as you read of his exploits. But these carved words are not just about glory in battle. They also contain profound political wisdom, advice, and warnings intended for future generations of Turkic nobles and the common people. Bilge Kaghan, in his own inscriptions, reflects on the history of his people, the rise and fall of the first Turkic Khaganate, the periods of subjugation under Chinese Tang dynasty influence, and the hard-won struggle to re-establish their independence and power. He sternly admonishes the Turkic people to remain united, to cherish their freedom, to uphold their ancestral traditions, and to be wary of the seductive but ultimately corrupting influences of settled civilizations, particularly the sweet words and soft silks of the Chinese, which he believed could weaken their martial spirit and lead to their downfall. It's like a very serious, very ancient, and incredibly public service announcement carved in stone. My Turkic people, my nation. One passage famously reads, "For your sake I have not slept by night, nor have I rested by day. Who would have moved your state and your law if I had not striven?" You can imagine a young Turkic noble or a common herdsman standing before this monumental text, perhaps with a literate elder or shaman, explaining its meaning and feeling a profound sense of connection to their history, their identity, and the weighty responsibilities passed down by their great leaders. There are also passages of deep lament and personal grief. The description of the mourning for Kul Tigin is incredibly moving, with envoys from distant lands, from the Tang Chinese emperor to Tibetan and Sogdian representatives, coming to pay their respects, a testament to his fame and the Khaganate's reach. Bilge speaks of his own profound sorrow at the loss of his brother, his eyes as if becoming blind, his mind as if lost. These are not just imperial pronouncements, they are human documents filled with emotion. A quirky and rather distinctive feature of these inscriptions is their often very specific, almost poetic opening lines, which frequently invoke Tengri, the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the ancient Turks and Mongols, as well as Umai, a mother goddess, and the sacred spirits of earth and water. This immediately sets a solemn and epic tone, framing the historical narrative that follows within a deeply spiritual worldview, asserting that the Khans rule by divine mandate from Tengri. The script itself, those elegant angular runes, adds to the mystique. Philologists and historians still engage in vigorous debate regarding the precise origins and developmental influences on this old Turkic runic script. Was it primarily derived from the Sogdian alphabet used by those great Silk Road traders, who also served as scribes and administrators for many nomadic groups? Or from Aramaic script via other intermediaries? Or perhaps even from earlier local pictographic or Tamga-like clan symbol traditions? Or was it a more independent, ingenious local innovation, specifically adapted by Turkic peoples for carving onto stone and wood? What is undeniable is the skill of the carvers who executed these inscriptions, often on massive, carefully prepared stone surfaces, ensuring clarity and a kind of monumental permanence. These stelae were meant to be seen to be read by those who could, and to endure as lasting testaments. Their version of a national archive or a presidential library was basically these incredibly impressive, remarkably weather-beaten stone pillars standing sentinel on the open steppe. Their librarians probably just very hardy, long-suffering marmots, and the occasional circling eagle who appreciated a good, clear view of history. As you stand before these carved words in the Orkhon Valley, even in your imagination you feel a powerful connection to this lost world. The wind that sighs around these silent stones seems to carry the echoes of the Turkic Khans, their boasts of victory, their wise counsel, their laments for fallen heroes. These are not just deserted memorial sites, they are libraries of stone history books open to the sky, telling tales of time, of empire, of the human condition. Directly from the heart of the ancient steppe, a powerful, enduring voice from a world that, though long vanished, still has so much to say. The ancient Turkic inscriptions you've just pondered, those powerful words carved into enduring stone in the sacred Orkhon Valley, offer a directive, sometimes challenging voice from a mighty nomadic empire that dominated the steppes over 1,000 years ago. They speak of Khans and heroes, of battles won, and laws established, all under the watchful gaze of Tengri, the sky god. But as you continue your journey through the deserted settlements of Mongolia, listening for their tales of time, you move forward many centuries, encountering the poignant ruins of a different kind of spiritual endeavor sites that once pulsed with chanting incense and profound philosophical learning, but now lie largely silent, nestled in lonely valleys, their stones whispering of a vibrant Buddhist faith that once flourished here only to be met by the harsh winds of political upheaval the deserted Buddhist monasteries. While Buddhism had made earlier inroads into the Mongolian steppes, a mainstream historical fact is that Tibetan Buddhism, specifically the Gelug school, often referred to as Lamaism, became the dominant religion in Mongolia from the late 16th century onwards. This was a period of profound cultural transformation, spurred by influential leaders like Altan Khan, who forged strong ties with Tibetan Buddhist masters. This new wave of faith led to the construction of hundreds, even thousands of monasteries, or kure and kid, as they are known in Mongolian across the vast landscape. These weren't just simple chapels. Many grew into substantial complexes, vibrant centers of religious life, learning, art, medicine, and even considerable economic and political influence. They were often sited in places of great natural beauty and spiritual power, sheltered river valleys, the foothills of sacred mountains, or sites already imbued with older pre-Buddhist sanctity. Imagine these monasteries not just as quiet places for a bit of solitary meditation and some light chanting. They were often bustling spiritual universities, elaborate art academies producing exquisite thankas and sculptures, traditional medical centers, and vibrant community hubs all rolled into one, probably with a slightly better and more consistently available snack bar than those ancient windswept Turkic memorial sites. As you approach the ruins of one such deserted monastery today, perhaps a place like Ongin Kid in the Gobi, or Manzushir Kid, nestled in the mountains near Ulaanbaatar. Before its partial restoration, the sense of profound loss mixed with enduring spirituality can be almost overwhelming. Even in their dilapidated state, you can often discern the layout of a once grand establishment. You might see the crumbling thick earthen or stone walls that once enclosed the sacred precinct. Within you'd find the raised stone foundations of former temple halls, their massive wooden pillars and ornate multi-tiered roofs, long since vanished, but their footprint still clearly visible. Scattered around might be the remains of smaller structures, the monks' living quarters, kitchens, storehouses, or perhaps a library where countless precious sutras and philosophical treatises were once carefully preserved. Imagine their library system, vast collections of hand-printed or even handwritten sacred texts brought with great effort from Tibet or printed locally. The late return fees for borrowing one of those sacred scrolls were probably just an eternity of unfavorable rebirths, which is a pretty strong incentive to ensure your papyrus or parchment was returned promptly and in good condition. You might find a few weathered stupas or suvarga, those distinctive Buddhist reliquary mounds, still standing. Their whitewash faded their spires, perhaps broken, yet still exuding an aura of sacredness. Intricately carved stone bases for prayer wheels or even fragments of the wheels themselves might lie half buried in the grass. If you are exceptionally lucky in a sheltered corner of a collapsed wall, you might glimpse the faint, faded remnants of a once vibrant wall mural. Perhaps a serene Buddha, a fierce protector deity, or a complex mandala, its colors now muted by time and exposure, but its artistry still palpable. What brought these vibrant centers of faith and learning to their current state of deserted ruin? While some older, smaller, or more remote monasteries might have simply fallen into disuse over long periods due to shifting populations, declining local patronage, or natural decay, the vast majority of the monastic ruins you see scattered across Mongolia today tell a much more recent and tragic tale. This is the devastating legacy of the anti-religious purges carried out by the communist regime in Mongolia during the 1930s, particularly around 1937 to 1939, under the influence of Stalinist policies. During this dark period, hundreds of Buddhist monasteries were systematically destroyed by dynamite, or dismantled, their treasures looted, or melted down, their sacred texts burned, and tens of thousands of monks were arrested, executed, or forced to disrobe and abandon their monastic vows. It was a brutal attempt to eradicate Buddhism as a social and political force in the country. So as you walk among these silent stones, you are treading on ground, saturated not just with ancient piety, but also with profound historical trauma. The broken walls, the scattered remnants, are not just picturesque ruins. They are the physical scars of a deliberate, violent attempt to erase a cornerstone of Mongolian culture and identity. Yet even in their desolation, these sites whisper powerful stories. They tell of the incredible devotion of the Mongolian people to their adopted Buddhist faith, of the immense resources and artistry poured into creating these magnificent centers of worship and learning. They speak of a sophisticated monastic life of scholars debating intricate points of philosophy, of artists creating breathtaking works of sacred art, of healers tending to the sick using traditional Tibetan medicine, and of thousands of monks dedicating their lives to prayer, meditation, and the pursuit of enlightenment. A quirky and rather fascinating aspect of Mongolian Buddhism was its ability to often incorporate or syncretize with older pre-Buddhist shamanistic beliefs and local nature spirits. So within a monastery's grounds or in its iconography, you might find representations or acknowledgments of local mountain deities Savdag or powerful nature spirits, now reinterpreted as protectors of the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. This blending of traditions added a unique Mongolian flavor to their practice of Buddhism. Historians and art historians who study the remnants of these destroyed monastic complexes still engage in considerable debate regarding the precise extent of regional variations in Mongolian Buddhist monastic architecture, artistic styles, and specific ritual interpretations before the widespread destructions of the 20th century. With so much physical evidence lost, piecing together the full picture of this rich heritage is a challenging ongoing task, relying on surviving textual descriptions, old photographs where they exist the memories of elderly survivors, and the careful excavation of the ruins themselves. Today, with the revival of religious freedom in Mongolia since the 1990s, some of these ruined monasteries are slowly being rebuilt or reconsecrated, often with immense community effort and devotion. But many others remain as they were left after the purges, poignant silent reminders of both profound spiritual flourishing and devastating historical loss. As you sit among the weathered stones of one such deserted monastery, perhaps in a lonely valley, with only the wind and the cry of a distant hawk for company, you can almost hear the faint ghostly echoes of chanting, the distant sound of temple horns, the murmur of prayers. It's like these valleys still hold the spiritual imprint, the sacred energy of a vibrant religious life that was brutally interrupted, their stones continuing to whisper tales of time, of faith, of destruction, and perhaps of the enduring resilience of the human spirit to seek meaning and connection with the divine, even amidst the harshest of earthly trials. The deserted monasteries you've just wandered through in your mind, with their crumbling walls and faint echoes of Buddhist chants, tell a poignant tale of a vibrant spiritual tradition that once graced the lonely valleys of Mongolia, only to be met by the harsh realities of 20th century political storms. Their silence is relatively recent, their stories tinged with a knowable if tragic history. But as you continue your quest for the tales told by Mongolia's deserted settlements, you must now journey much further back in time to an era long before the Khans, before even the Turkic inscriptions, to encounter sites where the earth itself has acted as an almost miraculous preserver, not through human intent, but through the deep enduring chill of permafrost. Here in these frozen tombs, the deserted settlements of the long dead, lie rich secrets and astonishingly vivid whispers of ancient nomadic life. Imagine venturing into the high Altai Mountains, a rugged, majestic range that forms a natural border for parts of Mongolia, or into similar high-altitude, perennially frozen regions of the steppe. Here, for certain periods of antiquity, particularly during the Iron Age roughly from the 5th to 3rd centuries, BCE nomadic peoples like those of the famed Pazyryk culture, often considered part of the broader Scythian-Siberian world, developed unique burial practices. A mainstream historical fact of immense archaeological importance is that these cultures often constructed elaborate burial mounds or kurgans for their elite. In regions with permafrost, water would sometimes seep into the deep log-lined burial chambers beneath these kurgans, and then freeze solid, encasing the deceased and their grave goods in a block of ice. This natural deep freeze, lasting for millennia, has preserved organic materials, textiles, leather, wood, even human flesh and food, to an extent that is almost unimaginable in more temperate climates. It's like these ancient nomads inadvertently stumbled upon the world's most effective long-term storage solution. Just bury your most cherished possessions, your favorite horse, and indeed yourself, inside a giant, naturally occurring mountain-sized icebox. Guaranteed to stay remarkably fresh and archaeologically fascinating for a couple of thousand years, give or take a minor ice age or two. When archaeologists carefully excavate these frozen tombs, it's like stepping directly into a moment suspended in time. The level of preservation can be breathtaking. You might find sacrificed horses often interred with the deceased, still adorned with their elaborate bridles, saddles intricately decorated with tooled leather and felt appliques, and even their manes and tails beautifully braided. The horses themselves are sometimes so well preserved that even the contents of their last meals can be analyzed from their stomachs. And the human occupants of these icy tombs, they too can be astonishingly intact. The most famous Pazyryk burials have yielded mummified, or rather, ice-preserved bodies of chieftains and noblewomen, their skin still bearing incredibly intricate and artistic tattoos. These aren't just simple marks. They are elaborate designs featuring fantastical creatures, intertwining animal combat scenes, stags with exaggerated antlers, and other powerful symbols of steppe art, all rendered with remarkable skill. This gives us a direct, unparalleled glimpse into their personal adornment, their artistic motifs, and perhaps even aspects of their spiritual beliefs or social status, as expressed through body art. Forget just finding a few old bones. This is like meeting the individuals themselves, their stories literally written on their skin, preserved for millennia. The grave goods interred with them are a riot of organic materials rarely seen from other archaeological contexts of this age. You might find magnificent felt hangings and carpets, some of massive size, decorated with vibrant applique designs of riders' animals and mythological scenes. There are garments made of wool leather and even imported Chinese silk. Testament to the surprisingly long-distance trade connections these nomadic peoples maintained, wooden objects abound, carved tables, drinking vessels, parts of disassembled chariots or carts, and even complex musical instruments like multi-stringed harp-like instruments or drums made of stretched animal hide their silent forms, hinting at the sounds and ceremonies of a lost world. Their version of a time capsule wasn't some hastily buried rusty metal box filled with a few contemporary newspapers and a commemorative coin. It was an entire fully furnished and often quite lavishly equipped subterranean frozen suite complete with transportation sacrificed horses, naturally entertainment systems, those ancient harps and drums, and some surprisingly stylish felt tapestries for an extra touch of afterlife coziness. A particularly quirky and fascinating tidbit from some of the Pazyryk tombs, like the one containing the famous Ice Maiden, a high-status woman, is the discovery of small personal items that speak volumes about their daily lives and beliefs. For example, small tables that held offerings of food or little bags containing coriander seeds used for flavoring, or perhaps ritual incense, or even in one famous instance, a small brazier and a pouch containing cannabis seeds along with evidence of inhalation through a small tent-like structure, suggesting its use in ritualistic or perhaps shamanistic practices. It's these intimate details preserved by the ice that allow us to feel an almost direct connection to these ancient people. What do these frozen tombs, these rich secrets tell us? They reveal a sophisticated and artistically vibrant nomadic culture, far removed from any outdated stereotype of primitive barbarians. They demonstrate incredible craftsmanship in textiles, leatherwork, woodworking, and metal casting. They underscore the absolute centrality of the horse in their lives, their warfare, their status, and their journey to the afterlife. The wealth of grave goods points to a strongly hierarchical society with a powerful elite capable of commanding significant resources and elaborate funerary rites. And the presence of imported goods like Chinese silk and mirrors or Persian-style textiles highlights their active participation in the vast network of exchange that was the precursor to or an early phase of the Silk Road proper. Archaeologists and art historians continue to engage in detailed study and spirited debate regarding the precise symbolic meanings and the complex cultural origins of many of the intricate motifs and artistic styles found in Pazyryk art and tattoos. Are they purely expressions of local shamanistic beliefs and steppe animal-style traditions? To what extent do they show influences from the Achaemenid Persian Empire to the south from Scythian cultures? Further west, or from interactions with ancient Chinese civilizations to the east? And how did these elaborate symbols relate specifically to the deceased individual's status, their clan affiliation, or their perceived needs and journey in the afterlife? These frozen tombs are truly deserted settlements of the dead, undisturbed by time in the same way as wind-scoured surface ruins. The permafrost has acted as an unintentional but incredibly effective curator, preserving fragile whispers from a world that would otherwise be almost entirely lost to us. As you contemplate these icy chambers, you're not just looking at artifacts, you are looking at a snapshot, a frozen moment from a vibrant, complex, and powerful nomadic civilization that once roamed the vast, beautiful, and often unforgiving landscapes at the heart of Asia, leaving behind these astonishingly rich secrets for us to marvel at 2,500 years later. The astonishing preservation found within those frozen tombs of the Altai, those icy time capsules holding vibrant textiles, intricate tattoos, and even the very flesh of ancient nomadic chieftains as you've just imagined, owes its existence to the unique and unrelenting power of permafrost, a gift of a consistently frigid climate in those high mountain redoubts. But climate, as you know, is not always so constant or so benignly preservative. Across the vast open steppes of Mongolia, the shifting fortunes of climate over millennia, the long, slow cycles of warmer and wetter periods giving way to prolonged droughts or intensely cold epochs, have played an equally profound, though often far more destructive role in shaping human history, contributing directly to the rise and fall of empires and to the poignant desertion of countless settlements whose tales are now whispered by the wind across a changed land. The Mongolian steppe, for all its stark beauty and immense scale, is an environment of delicate balances. It's a semi-arid to arid continental land, meaning scorching summers can give way to brutally cold winters. Rainfall is often unpredictable, and the availability of good pasture and fresh water. The absolute lifeblood for any pastoral nomadic society can fluctuate dramatically from year to year, and even more so over decades and centuries. A mainstream historical fact established through the careful analysis of ice cores from glaciers' sediment layers, from lake beds, ancient tree rings were available and pollen preserved in bogs, is that the Central Asian steppes, including Mongolia, have indeed experienced significant climatic fluctuations throughout the Holocene, the epoch of human civilization. These weren't just minor variations. Some periods saw prolonged, severe droughts that could turn grasslands into dust bowls, while others brought extended cold snaps or unusually harsh winters known in Mongolia by the devastating term dzud. It seems winter is coming was a far more serious and often existentially threatening, annual and multi-generational concern for these ancient steppe dwellers, long before it became a popular catchphrase on your favorite epic fantasy television series. Their version of a particularly bad winter could quite literally mean the decimation of their herds and the potential collapse of their entire way of life, possibly even their empire. Imagine you are part of a nomadic group, your entire existence dependent on the health and well-being of your horses, sheep, and goats. A prolonged drought sets in. The usually lush summer pastures wither and turn brown. Waterholes dry up, rivers shrink to mere trickles. Your animals grow weak, their ribs showing milk production plummets, and many begin to die. Your children go hungry. The traditional grazing lands that have sustained your people for generations can no longer support you. What choice do you have? You must move, you must seek new pastures, new water sources, often pushing into territories already occupied by other groups, which could lead to conflict. Any semi-permanent winter encampments, any favored seasonal campsites, any rudimentary administrative centers you might have established in your now parched homeland would have to be abandoned, left to the encroaching desert. Or consider the opposite extreme, a dzud. This is a uniquely Mongolian climatic disaster, often involving a summer drought that prevents sufficient hay from being gathered, followed by an incredibly severe winter with deep, persistent snow cover, or perhaps an impenetrable ice crust forming over the grasslands. Your animals, already weakened, simply cannot break through to the meager fodder beneath. They perish in vast numbers, sometimes entire herds wiped out. For a people whose wealth, sustenance, and social standing are all tied to their livestock, a catastrophic dzud could be an unmitigated disaster, forcing survivors to disperse to seek aid from more fortunate kinsmen, or to abandon their traditional way of life entirely. Any settlements, no matter how symbolically important, would become untenable if the herds that supported them were gone. Their long-range weather forecast, if they had one beyond the immediate pronouncements of their shamans, and the wisdom of their elders reading the signs in the wind, and the behavior of animals, was probably less about a 30% chance of light afternoon showers, and more along the lines of a 50-50 chance of a catastrophic empire-toppling drought this decade, possibly followed by a deeply inconvenient and herd-decimating mini-ice age. Bashite made planning your seasonal migrations and your decadal imperial strategies just a tad tricky. Even the more settled communities you've encountered in our journey, the Xiongnu with their earthen forts, the Uyghurs with their Manichaean cities like Karbalgas or the later Buddhist monastic centers, were not immune to these climatic shifts. While they might have had some stored food reserves or engaged in limited agriculture, their prosperity and indeed their very existence was often still fundamentally linked to the productivity of the surrounding steppe environment, which supported the pastoral economy that in turn supported them through trade tribute or offerings. A prolonged drought that devastated the herds of the nomadic populations in their hinterlands would inevitably impact the viability of these fixed settlements. Trade would dry up, resources would become scarce, and the social order that sustained these centers could unravel. Archaeologists often find direct or indirect evidence of these climatic pressures in the deserted settlements themselves. Layers of wind-blown sand or loess within the ruins can indicate periods of increased aridity and desertification. Changes in the types of animal bones found in middens might show a shift in diet, perhaps from herded animals to a greater reliance on hunting less desirable wild game, hinting at pastoral stress. The very location of some abandoned sites, now in areas that are marginal or completely uninhabitable, often speaks volumes about past climatic conditions that were once more favorable. A quirky and rather poignant folk memory or historical account from some steppe cultures might link a major migration, the fall of a particular dynasty, or the abandonment of a significant ancestral site directly to a specific catastrophic weather event. A winter of black disaster? A 7-year drought that baked the earth, or a flood of biblical proportions. While these tales might become embellished over time, they often contain a kernel of truth about the profound vulnerability of steppe societies to the whims of climate. Paleoclimatologists, archaeologists, and historians continue to engage in intensive interdisciplinary debate regarding the precise causal links and the relative importance of these climatic downturns versus other contributing factors, such as internal political fragmentation, the outbreak of epidemic diseases among humans, or livestock disruptive intertribal warfare, or sustained external pressures from powerful neighboring sedentary states like China, in triggering the major migrations, the dramatic societal collapses, or the large-scale patterns of settlement abandonment that are observed in the long and complex historical and archaeological records of the Mongolian steppes and broader Central Asia. What is undeniable is that climate was a powerful, often invisible hand shaping the destinies of these ancient peoples and the longevity of their settlements. The tales of time whispered by these deserted sites are therefore not just stories of human ambition, of khans and empires of trade and religion. They are also profound narratives of adaptation, of resilience, and sometimes of surrender in the face of overwhelming environmental change. The shifting fortunes of climate are etched into their very stones, their crumbling walls and the silent empty spaces where life once thrived, a constant reminder of the delicate and often precarious balance between human civilization and the enduring power of the natural world. You can almost imagine a Xiongnu Chanyu or an Uyghur Kagan gazing out at his increasingly parched pastures or a snow-covered landscape devoid of grazing and muttering to his advisors. Right! Either we need to organize some very serious and hopefully effective offerings to the sky god Tengri for a significant change in the weather patterns, or it's high time we started seriously updating our entire civilization's forwarding address to somewhere considerably less dusty and/or frozen, preferably with more grass. The shifting fortunes of climate, as you've now considered, played a profound and often relentless role in shaping the destiny of settlements across the Mongolian steppes. with prolonged droughts or brutal dews capable of turning thriving pastoral landscapes into desperate deserted expanses. These were the grand, slow rhythms of nature dictating human fate. But there was another equally powerful, though perhaps more human-driven force that could lead to the decline and eventual abandonment of once prosperous outposts. Particularly those whose very existence was tied to the pulse of transcontinental commerce, the fading footprints of the Silk Road itself as ancient overland trade routes gradually gave way to new global pathways. For century upon century, as you know, the Silk Road was not just a single track, but a vast, sprawling network of interconnected routes that served as the arteries of trade culture and ideas across Eurasia. Cities, oasis towns, and even strategically located nomadic encampments along these pathways flourished, drawing life and wealth from the constant flow of caravans laden with silk spices, tea porcelain precious metals, horses, and 1,000 other goods. These settlements were the vital nodes, the bustling caravanserai, the marketplaces where East met West. Their prosperity, their very reason for being, was inextricably linked to the thrum of this international commerce. It's like the Silk Road was the ancient world's most extensive and vital superhighway system. And these settlements were the indispensable service stations, trading posts, and bustling interchange cities that kept the whole incredible enterprise moving. But highways, even those as legendary as the Silk Road, can fall into disuse if new, more efficient or safer routes emerge. And from around the 14th and 15th centuries, CE onwards, a confluence of factors began to significantly diminish the primacy of many of these ancient overland pathways, leading to the gradual fading of their footprints in the sands and steppes. A mainstream historical fact is that one of the most significant of these factors was the rise of maritime trade. As European powers, particularly the Portuguese, Spanish, and later the Dutch and English, developed advanced shipbuilding technologies and navigational skills during the Age of Discovery, they began to pioneer long-distance sea routes directly to India, Southeast Asia, and China. These ocean voyages, while still perilous, could often transport larger quantities of bulk goods more cheaply and sometimes more quickly than the arduous, tax-laden and bandit-prone overland caravan routes. Suddenly, the ancient world's primary e-commerce platform, which relied on actual, rather slow-moving camels and months, if not years, of arduous trekking, found itself being seriously outcompeted by the new disruptive, next-century global shipping via very large wind-powered boat business model. It was a tough break for many of the established overland delivery specialists in the towns that serviced them. Political instability across Central Asia also played a major role. The vast Mongol Empire, which under Chinggis Khan and his immediate successors had created the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and security across much of Eurasia that greatly facilitated Silk Road trade in the 13th and early 14th centuries, eventually fragmented. Its successor Khanates often warred amongst themselves, and later new regional powers rose and fell. This political fragmentation often led to increased insecurity along the overland routes, with more borders to cross more local potentates, demanding exorbitant transit taxes or protection money, and a greater risk of banditry or outright warfare disrupting caravan traffic. The devastating impact of the Black Death, which swept across Eurasia in the mid-14th century, also cannot be understated. This catastrophic pandemic decimated populations, shattered economies, and severely disrupted the established networks of trade and communication that the Silk Road relied upon. It would take centuries for some regions to fully recover, and by then global trade patterns were already beginning to shift. Furthermore, the policies of major empires at either end of the Silk Road could also influence its viability. The rise of the Ottoman Empire controlling key Western junctures created new geopolitical dynamics. In China, the Ming dynasty, after overthrowing the Mongol, Yuan dynasty sometimes pursued more isolationist policies or shifted its focus towards maritime trade and coastal defense, which could affect the volume and nature of goods flowing along the overland routes. What did this mean for those once thriving settlements in and around the Mongolian steppes that had prospered due to their strategic location on a branch of the Silk Road? For many, it meant a slow, inexorable decline. As the caravans became fewer and farther between, as the lucrative trade in high-value goods increasingly bypassed them in favor of sea routes or more southerly overland paths, their economic lifeblood began to dry up. Merchants moved away seeking opportunities elsewhere. Local artisans who catered to the caravan trade found their markets shrinking. The wealth that had supported local rulers maintained infrastructure like wells and caravanserai and funded religious institutions began to dwindle. You can imagine the scene in one of these fading Silk Road outposts. The marketplace, once vibrant with the chatter of a dozen languages and piled high with exotic goods, grows quieter each year. Fewer camels rest in the caravanserai. The workshops of the craftsmen fall silent. Young people begin to drift away to seek their fortunes in more prosperous regions. Those who remain are often the elderly, the less adventurous, or those simply too poor to leave. The once well-maintained roads leading to the settlement become overgrown, the wells less frequently cleaned. The buildings slowly falling into disrepair. It's a poignant gradual process of abandonment, not usually a sudden catastrophe, but a slow fading. Like a vibrant tapestry left out in the sun and rain for too long. You can almost picture the last very lonely innkeeper in a rapidly declining Silk Road town carefully dusting off his ancient, welcome thirsty silk merchants. Best rates for bulk tea storage. Sighing and muttering to himself, I knew I should have listened to my cousin and invested in beachfront property down by the Southern Ocean. Or at least learned how to build a really good seaworthy ship. A quirky and often quite melancholy local legend might spring up in such a place, perhaps attributing the decline not to complex global economic shifts, but to a specific curse, a forgotten offering to a local spirit, or the departure of a mythical protective beast that once ensured the town's prosperity. These folk memories, however anachronistic, would be a way of trying to make sense of a profound and often inexplicable loss. Archaeologists and economic historians continue to engage in detailed research and debate regarding the precise chronology and the relative weight and interplay of these various complex factors. The rise of maritime trade, regional political instability, environmental challenges, and shifting imperial policies. In contributing to the decline and eventual abandonment of different specific branches and key urban centers of the Overland Silk Road across its vast and varied geographical expanse. For you wandering through the nearly invisible footprint of what was once a bustling Silk Road town on the edge of the Gobi Desert, the silence is now profound. The only caravans that pass are those of the wind, carrying sand and the seeds of hardy steppe grasses. The fading footprints of this once great artery of global exchange are a powerful reminder of how interconnected the world was even in ancient times, and how the fortunes of even remote settlements could be dramatically altered by decisions made and events unfolding thousands of miles away. These deserted sites tell a tale not just of local life, but of global shifts of rising and falling empires, and of the relentless, ever-changing currents of human commerce and connection. The fading footprints of the Silk Road, the relentless power of climatic shifts, the rise and fall of great khans and their empires. All these forces, as you've now journeyed through in your mind, have contributed to the poignant silence that envelops so many of Mongolia's deserted settlements. These places, once perhaps bustling with life or imbued with sacred power, now lie open to the vast sky, their stories seemingly scattered by the steppe winds. But how do we even begin to hear these faint whispers from the past? How do we uncover the tales that these silent stones and subtle earthworks are trying to tell? This is where you witness the patient, meticulous, and often incredibly challenging quest of archaeology. Conducting archaeology on the Mongolian steppe is not for the faint of heart, nor for those in a particular hurry. Imagine the sheer scale of it, a landscape that stretches for hundreds, even thousands of kilometers often, with few landmarks where ancient sites might be incredibly subtle, deeply buried by centuries of wind-blown lauas or so, ephemeral in their original nature. Like a temporary nomadic campsite that they leave barely a whisper on the Earth's surface. It's not like looking for a Roman amphitheater or a medieval castle. Here the ruins might be nothing more than a slight discoloration of the soil, a faint circular depression where a jeer once stood, or a sparse scatter of pottery sherds almost invisible amidst the hardy steppe grasses. Forget finding a conveniently placed giant blinking neon sign saying ancient lost Zhongnu fortress this way, mind the marmots. It's far more like being a detective where the crime scene is the approximate size of Western Europe. Most of the crucial clues are microscopic or have been dead for several millennia, and the prime suspect for who keeps moving that really important artifact we were just about to photograph is usually a very enthusiastic and industrious burrowing rodent. So how do archaeologists begin their patient search? A mainstream historical fact is that modern archaeological investigation in these vast steppe environments employs a whole range of sophisticated scientific methods, often starting long before a single trowel touches the ground. Extensive pedestrian surveys are fundamental. Teams of archaeologists will walk systematically across designated areas, their eyes scanning the ground for any telltale signs of past human activity. Those crucial surface scatters of artifacts, unusual arrangements of stones, or subtle changes in vegetation that might indicate buried features. Remote sensing technologies, as you can imagine, are an absolute game changer here. Satellite imagery can reveal large-scale patterns invisible from ground level. Perhaps the faint outline of ancient field systems, the grid of a forgotten city's streets, massive defensive enclosures, or even the almost imperceptible traces of ancient trackways that once connected these settlements. Drone photography, providing high-resolution aerial views of specific localities, allows for detailed mapping and the identification of smaller features. And then there are the geophysical surveys. Techniques like magnetometry can detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried hearths, kilns, or ditches. Ground-penetrating radar can send pulses into the Earth, revealing the presence of subsurface walls, foundations, or even buried tomb chambers without disturbing a single grain of sand. It's like giving the archaeologists a set of high-tech divining rods, allowing them to see beneath the steppe's enigmatic surface. Once a promising site or feature is identified, the careful, targeted excavation begins. This isn't a treasure hunt. It's a slow, meticulous dissection of the layers of time. Archaeologists will often lay out a precise grid over the area to be investigated, and then excavate small squares or trenches, removing the soil layer by painstaking layer, often with small trowels and brushes. Every find, no matter how seemingly insignificant, a tiny pottery sherd, a fragment of animal bone, a fleck of charcoal, is precisely recorded its exact three-dimensional location, its association with other finds or soil layers, its stratigraphy, all meticulously documented with notes, drawings, and photographs. This context is everything. An artifact without its context loses much of its storytelling power. The recovered materials are then subjected to intense analysis in laboratories. Pottery fragments are cleaned, sorted, and painstakingly pieced back together if possible. Their clay composition can be analyzed to determine where they were made local or imported, and their style and decoration can help to date the site and identify its cultural affiliations. Stone tools or lithics reveal information about ancient technologies, hunting practices, and sometimes even trade networks for specific types of stone. Metal artifacts, bronze arrowheads, iron knives, gold ornaments from elite burials speak of craftsmanship, warfare, and social status. And if organic remains are preserved, perhaps in those remarkable frozen tombs we discussed, or even as carbonized seeds or microscopic pollen grains in ordinary soil, they can tell us about ancient diet agriculture in the past environment. Dating techniques like radiocarbon analysis for organic materials or thermoluminescence for pottery help to place these finds within a firm chronological framework. A quirky and sometimes surprisingly useful tool in the archaeologist's initial search can be the study of much later historical accounts. Perhaps the journals of early 20th century explorers, Russian ethnographers, or even old declassified Soviet-era military maps, which due to their detailed topographical information, might inadvertently reveal ancient earthworks or ruins that were visible features at the time the maps were made. Sometimes even listening to the subtle cues of local herd animals can provide a hint. Experienced herders know that animals might preferentially graze or avoid certain patches of ground due to subtle differences in vegetation that are in turn caused by underlying ancient human occupation, like the nutrient-richer soil over an old refuse midden. Archaeologists often engage in considerable scholarly debate when interpreting the empty spaces or those areas of the steppe that yield only very sparse and scattered artifact distributions. Do these truly represent zones of minimal ancient human activity, or just seasonal transit routes? Or are our current survey methodologies and detection techniques still sometimes insufficient to pick up the extremely ephemeral, almost invisible archaeological signatures left behind by certain types of highly mobile, small-scale nomadic groups, or very specialized short-term land use patterns from the distant past? What is undeniable is that this patient search, this meticulous piecing together of fragmented clues, is how the deserted Mongolian settlements begin to yield their tales of time. It's a slow, often challenging, but incredibly rewarding process. Each discovery, each carefully interpreted find, allows us to hear another faint whisper from these lost worlds, gradually building a richer, more nuanced understanding of the diverse peoples who once called this vast, windswept land their home, and whose stories are waiting to be rediscovered one silent stone, one pottery sherd at a time. The patient quest of archaeology, as you've now seen with its meticulous surveys, its high-tech remote sensing, and its careful excavation of scattered artifacts, allows us to slowly piece together the tangible material stories of Mongolia's deserted settlements. These scientific methods can tell us about the age of a site, the types of dwellings, the tools used, the diet of the people, and sometimes even their trade connections or causes of decline. But there is another, often more elusive yet equally fascinating way that these ancient places continue to whisper their tales of time through the faint, sometimes fragmented but deeply resonant memories preserved in the oral traditions and folklore of the nomadic peoples who still traverse these vast historic landscapes. In societies like those of the traditional Mongolian steppes, where widespread literacy was a relatively late development for the common populace oral tradition, the art of storytelling, the recitation of epic poems, the singing of ancient songs, the passing down of proverbs and place name lore, served as the primary and incredibly powerful vehicle for transmitting history, cultural values, cosmological understanding, and a sense of collective identity from one generation to the next. A mainstream historical fact is that these oral traditions, while not always history, in the precise fact-checked academic sense we might expect today, can often preserve surprisingly long-lasting, if sometimes symbolic or mythologized memories of ancient peoples' significant past events, the sacred importance of certain locations or explanations for striking features in the landscape, including those enigmatic deserted settlements. So while the archaeologist might be meticulously mapping the post holes of a long-vanished Xiongnu dwelling, the local nomadic elder, sitting by his gur fire, might tell you a story passed down from his own grandfather about how the old ones who lived in that spot long ago were said to be descended from a sky wolf, or how they were forced to leave because they offended a powerful mountain spirit. The details might be different, the language more poetic, but both are trying to make sense of the same silent stones. As you, the imaginary traveler, sit with a group of herders under the vast, star-dusted Mongolian night, sharing a bowl of salty milk tea, you might begin to hear these faint, folkloric memories. Perhaps you point to a distant, crumbling earthen wall, barely visible in the twilight, and ask about it. The stories you hear might not speak of the precise Uyghur Khaganate or the specific historical reasons for that city's abandonment that archaeologists debate. Instead, you might be told a legend of a proud, forgotten king who built a great city there, but whose arrogance angered Tengri, the sky god, leading to its destruction by a sudden storm or a mysterious plague. Or perhaps the ruins are attributed to a race of ancient giants, or even to mischievous earth spirits who built it in a single night and then vanished. Their version of a historical marker for a particularly impressive but very ruined city might not be a neat bronze plaque with dates and facts, but rather a really epic multi-day song cycle passed down through generations of bards, detailing the glorious deeds of a mythical Khan, his incredibly intelligent talking horse, a few seriously misunderstood mountain spirits, and a very dramatic, if perhaps slightly historically vague, reason for why absolutely everyone eventually packed up their gears and moved several hundred miles to the west. These tales, while perhaps not providing a direct, verifiable historical account that would satisfy a modern historian looking for primary source documents, are invaluable in their own right. They tell you how later generations of people living in that landscape have made sense of these ancient traces, how they have woven them into their own understanding of the world, their own moral universe. A ruin might become a place associated with a particular kind of spirit, a place to be avoided after dark, or a spot where specific offerings are still made, even if the original purpose of the structure has been entirely forgotten or reinterpreted. A quirky and often quite telling tidbit is how certain types of deserted settlements or ancient features might acquire specific folkloric reputations. For example, very old burial mounds, the kurgans of Bronze Age chieftains or ancient Turkic warriors, are often regarded by local herders with a mixture of deep respect and considerable superstitious fear. They might be believed to be protected by powerful ancestral spirits or local land guardians, Savdag or Azim. It would be considered extremely bad luck, if not downright dangerous, to disturb these graves to remove stones from them, or even in some cases to graze one's livestock too close. These beliefs, while perhaps not historical in a narrow sense, have often served as incredibly effective unintentional conservation mechanisms, protecting these ancient sites from disturbance for centuries far better than any modern heritage protection law might have done. Sometimes the folklore can preserve a surprisingly accurate, if metaphorical, memory. A legend about a city swallowed by sand in a region that archaeologists now know suffered from severe desertification in the past might be a poetic rendering of a very real environmental catastrophe. A story about a powerful Khan who flew away on a golden bird might be a distant mythologized echo of a ruling lineage that migrated to a new territory, or perhaps even an account of a shamanic leader known for his spiritual journeys. Ethnohistorians, folklorists, and archaeologists continue to engage in complex and often highly rewarding, though sometimes contentious, discussions and collaborative research regarding the best methodologies for responsibly interpreting and carefully correlating these often fragmented, highly symbolic or deeply metaphorical oral traditions with specific archaeological data recovered from deserted Mongolian settlements. The challenge lies in trying to discern potential historical kernels from many layers of subsequent mythic accretion, stylistic embellishment by generations of storytellers, and the natural transformations that occur in any long-lived oral narrative, all while fully respecting the integrity and cultural significance of the traditions themselves, as they are understood by the communities who preserve them today. For you as a listener to these tales of time, these faint memories and folklore offer a different kind of window onto the past than the scientific findings of archaeology. They provide a glimpse into the imaginative and spiritual landscape of the peoples who inherited these deserted sites, who lived alongside their silent stones, and who wove them into their own ongoing story of the steppe. They remind you that history is not just a collection of facts and dates, but also a living, breathing narrative, constantly being retold, reinterpreted, and imbued with new meaning. So, forget relying solely on Wikipedia for your local history lesson while out on the steppe. You'd be far better off respectfully consulting your nomadic grandmother, who probably had a deeply insightful story, a relevant proverb, or a hauntingly beautiful ancient song for every prominent rock, every crumbling ruin, and every suspiciously shaped cloud formation that drifted across the vast memory-laden Mongolian sky. The faint memories held within local nomadic folklore, those mythologized explanations for ancient ruins and whispers of forgotten peoples, as you've now considered, offer one very human way of trying to make sense of the deserted settlements scattered across the vast Mongolian steppe. These are the stories that people tell themselves to bridge the gap of time to connect with a past that is often only dimly perceived. But there is another immensely powerful and constantly active force that is also shaping these sites, a force that works not with words and legends, but with wind, sand, water, and the slow, inexorable growth of hardy steppe grasses, the gentle yet utterly relentless reclaiming hand of nature itself. As you stand in your mind's eye before the crumbling earthen rampart of an ancient Xiongnu fort, or wander through the almost invisible footprint of a Bronze Age nomadic encampment, you realize that these sites are not static monuments preserved under glass. They are dynamic parts of a living, breathing landscape constantly interacting with the elements. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological sites on the Mongolian steppe, like those in many open, arid, or semi-arid environments, are continuously subject to a whole suite of natural transformation processes. These processes over centuries and millennia can profoundly alter, conceal, or sometimes even paradoxically help to preserve the fragile traces of past human endeavors. It's like the steppe itself is a very slow, very patient and extremely persistent landscape artist. And its ongoing project is to gently, or sometimes not so gently, soften all those sharp, human-made historical edges, blending them back into the grand, sweeping canvas of the natural world. One of the most potent of these natural forces is the wind. Imagine the relentless steppe winds which you've already felt whipping around you on this journey. For much of the year, they scour the open plains, where ancient earthworks like fort walls or burial mounds stand exposed. The wind can act like a tireless sculptor, gradually eroding softer sediments, carrying away fine particles of dust and sand, and slowly, grain by grain, wearing down even the most substantial human constructions. But the wind is not just an agent of removal, it's also a master of deposition. It can carry vast quantities of loess, fine wind-blown silt, from distant deserts or eroded landscapes, and gently blanket entire regions, sometimes burying ancient campsites or smaller settlements under a protective, if concealing, layer of new earth. Great sand dunes driven by prevailing winds can slowly migrate across the landscape, sometimes engulfing entire oases or sections of old walled towns, only to perhaps move on again centuries later, revealing what they had hidden. The wind isn't just whispering tales here, it's actively, constantly rewriting the very landscape, sometimes burying chapters of history, sometimes unexpectedly exposing a new page. Water too plays its part even in this often arid environment. The infrequent but sometimes intense rains or the seasonal snowmelt can carve gullies through ancient earthworks, wash away surface artifacts, or deposit layers of alluvial silt in low-lying areas, further obscuring or altering sites. The freeze-thaw cycles of the harsh Mongolian winters can be particularly destructive to any exposed stonework or mud brick structures, with water seeping into cracks, freezing, expanding, and slowly prizing apart even the most resilient ancient masonry. Then there's the quiet, persistent power of vegetation. As soon as a site is abandoned, the hardy steppe grasses, the resilient shrubs, and sometimes even pioneering trees begin their slow work of colonization. Their roots can penetrate deep into earthen mounds or between foundation stones, stabilizing the soil in some ways, but also inexorably dislodging structures. Over time, a dense carpet of vegetation can completely obscure the original layout of a settlement, making its features almost invisible from ground level. A quirky and rather useful aspect of this for archaeologists, however, is that certain types of plants, perhaps those that thrive in disturbed soil, or in areas with slightly different nutrient concentrations due to past human activity, like old refuse middens or animal enclosures, can sometimes grow in distinct patterns that, when viewed from a distance or from an aerial perspective, actually help to outline the faint buried traces of ancient walls, hearths, or ditches. It's as if nature itself in its reclaiming sometimes leaves behind a subtle green and rather beautiful map for those who know how to read it. And we mustn't forget the animal kingdom's contribution to this slow transformation. The Mongolian steppe is home to a multitude of burrowing animals. Marmots, pikas, ground squirrels, and the like. These creatures, in their endless quest for cozy subterranean homes, are unwitting, and often rather enthusiastic archaeologists themselves, though their methods are considerably less systematic. Their tunnels can churn through ancient occupation layers, bringing older artifacts to the surface, pushing newer ones down, and generally scrambling the carefully stratified record that human archaeologists so patiently try to decipher. Forget a meticulously organized Roomba for your historical site cleanup crew. The steppe often employs a vast army of very energetic marmots. They're not particularly brilliant at dusting or preserving context, but they are absolute champions at randomly excavating and then immediately reburying, often in a completely different spot. Small, potentially historically significant, and now thoroughly decontextualized artifacts. This constant slow embrace by nature is what gives so many of these deserted Mongolian settlements their unique melancholic beauty. The crumbling walls of an abandoned Buddhist monastery is softened by centuries of wind and frost, with wildflowers blooming in its deserted courtyards and birds nesting in its broken roof timbers, speaks not just of human loss, but also of nature's enduring power to heal, to cover, and to transform. The ruins become less a stark testament to human failure or abandonment, and more an integral, harmonious part of the landscape itself. Their stones whispering tales not just of the people who built them, but of the deep, timeless cycles of creation, decay, and renewal. Geoarchaeologists and landscape archaeologists continue to engage in complex and vital debate regarding the precise rates, the long-term cumulative effects, and the often subtle interplay of these various natural transformation processes on different types of archaeological sites found across the incredibly diverse microenvironments of the Mongolian steppe. They try to understand how these natural filters, the erosion, the deposition, the bioturbation by animals, the vegetation growth, might have biased our current understanding of past human occupation patterns based on what has managed to survive what remains visible today and what might still lie hidden, perfectly preserved, or frustratingly jumbled just beneath the surface. For you, the contemplative traveler witnessing this slow, gentle reclaiming is a profound lesson in impermanence. The mightiest empires, the grandest capitals, the most sacred shrines, all eventually yield to the patient, persistent embrace of the wind, the sand, the grass, and the burrowing creatures of the earth. Nature doesn't so much destroy these deserted settlements as it enfolds them, integrates them, makes them part of its own ongoing story, ensuring that their tales of time are whispered, not just by human memory or historical record, but by the very land itself in a language that is ancient, subtle, and enduring. Your journey across the vast windswept plains of Mongolia, listening to the tales whispered by its deserted settlements, has taken you through millennia of human endeavor. From the faint traces of ancient nomadic campsites to the imposing earthen ramparts of Xiongnu forts, the stone memorials of Turkic Khans, the faded glory of Uyghur cities, the ghostly footprint of Karakorum, and the poignant ruins of Buddhist monasteries, you've witnessed how civilizations like the hardy steppe grasses thus themselves rise, flourish for a season, and then inevitably recede, leaving their stories etched into the enduring landscape. As our exploration draws towards its close for tonight, you might find yourself pondering the ultimate timeless lessons that these silent, often lonely places have to teach us about the grand sweep of history, the nature of empires, and the profound, inescapable truth of impermanence. The Mongolian steppe itself, with its immense unbroken horizons and its often harsh, unforgiving climate, seems to be a landscape uniquely suited to contemplating such themes. Here, more perhaps than in gentler, more crowded lands, the transient nature of human creations is starkly evident. A mainstream historical fact underscored by the rich archaeological record of this region is the cyclical pattern of societal development on the steppes. Powerful nomadic confederations and empires repeatedly emerged, often with astonishing speed, forged by charismatic leaders and skilled horse warriors, creating vast domains and sometimes even impressive urban or ceremonial centers. Yet just as dramatically, these empires would often fragment, decline, or be overthrown. Their capitals abandoned their people, dispersed their monuments, left to slowly crumble under the sun, wind, and frost. It seems the ultimate lesson whispered by these deserted Mongolian settlements over and over again is that even if you manage to build a truly epic, world-altering empire that stretches from the Pacific to the Danube, eventually the steppe grass will want its prime grazing land back. And the grass in the long run almost invariably wins. What are some of these whispered lessons from time carried on the steppe? Winds that sigh through these ruins. Firstly, there is the undeniable story of the rise and fall of power. The silent stones of Karakorum, for instance, speak of a moment when it was the conceptual center of the known world, the hub of an empire that commanded unimaginable wealth and military might. Yet within a few generations, its primacy faded, its walls decayed, and it became a ghost capital. The earthen forts of the Xiongnu, once symbols of a power that could challenge the mighty Han dynasty, are now just softened mounds, their strategic importance long forgotten. These sites remind you that no earthly power, no matter how seemingly absolute, is eternal. They also teach profound lessons about the impact of human choices and the consequences of internal divisions. The Orkhon inscriptions, those stone testaments of the Turkic Khans, are filled with warnings to future generations about the dangers of disunity, of losing sight of ancestral traditions, of succumbing to the sweet words and soft silks of foreign influence that could erode their strength. The eventual fate of their Khaganate and others like it often seems to validate these ancient anxieties. The deserted settlements often stand as silent witnesses to past political miscalculations, internal strife, or failures to adapt to changing circumstances. And as you've seen, these sites are a constant reminder of humanity's intricate and often dependent relationship with the natural world. The shifting fortunes of climate, the devastating droughts, the brutal dzoods, played a relentless role in shaping the viability of settlements and the destinies of entire peoples. The ruins of a village abandoned because its water source dried up, or a pastoralist encampment deserted after its herds were decimated by a harsh winter speak. Eloquently of this profound interconnectedness, their historical record often reads like a series of incredibly dramatic season finales, where one nomadic empire gets summarily canceled due to unforeseen environmental plot twists, and another, perhaps better adapted or just luckier with the celestial weather forecast, gets greenlit for a few glorious centuries, all playing out on the same vast, beautiful, and ultimately rather indifferent steppe stage. Yet the story whispered by these deserted settlements is not solely one of loss and decay. It is also a testament to incredible human resilience, adaptability, and creativity. For millennia, people thrived in this challenging environment, developing sophisticated nomadic pastoralist strategies, creating vibrant cultures, producing beautiful art, and forging powerful political entities. The very existence of these sites, even in their ruined state, speaks to the enduring human urge to build, to create order, to leave a mark, to express spiritual understanding. The intricate goldwork from an elite Seongnu tomb, the elegant calligraphy of a Turkic stele, the complex theology of a Manichaean text, carried along the Silk Road to an Uyghur city. All these are echoes of a vibrant human spirit, a quirky and perhaps rather poignant Mongolian proverb, or a line from an ancient epic, might capture this sense of impermanence and endurance. Perhaps something along the lines of, "The mountains may crumble, the rivers may dry, but the spirit of the blue sky endures," or "A good horse may die, but its fame gallops on." These sentiments reflect an understanding that while physical forms and earthly powers are transient, certain essential qualities, courage, wisdom, the memory of great deeds, the enduring spirit of the land and its people, have a longer life. Historians, archaeologists, and philosophers continue to engage in profound debate and contemplation regarding the overarching narratives and deeper meanings that can be drawn from studying deserted settlements and the cyclical rise and fall of empires across human history. Should the primary lesson be one of societal fragility and the ultimate futility of human ambition in the face of vast historical and environmental forces? Or can these silent ruins also be interpreted as powerful testaments to human adaptability? The constant ebb and flow of cultural innovation and transformation, and the enduring capacity of people to create meaning, beauty, and complex social order, even in the face of profound challenges and the certainty of eventual change and decay. As you stand in your mind's eye amidst the last vestiges of a forgotten Mongolian encampment, with the wind as your only companion, you realize that these places are more than just archaeological puzzles or historical footnotes. They are profound, memento mori reminders of our own place in the vast sweep of time. They teach humility, they inspire awe at what once was, and they prompt reflection on what endures. So, if you're ever feeling a little overwhelmed by your own small human endeavors and their seemingly fleeting significance, just remember those mighty Khans, those bustling Silk Road cities, those once glorious capitals. Even they, with all their power and splendor, couldn't get a permanent, non-negotiable lease on history. It somehow makes that unfinished DIY project in your garage or that slightly overdue library book seem a little less catastrophically important, doesn't it? The tales these deserted settlements tell are indeed tales of time itself, of its power to create and destroy, to preserve and to forget. They are the quiet whispered lessons of the steppe for any who have the patience to listen. Word count 3097, and so as the vast Mongolian sky begins to darken and the first stars prick the deep indigo velvet overhead, our journey through its deserted settlements and their whispered tales of time gently comes to a close for tonight. The crumbling earthworks, the silent kurgans, the windswept ruins of ancient capitals and lonely monasteries, all now rest under the immense watchful gaze of the steppe night, Imagine the profound silence of these ancient places, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the hardy grasses, or the distant mournful cry of a nocturnal creature. The great Khans, the fierce warriors, the devout monks, the everyday herders, who once peopled these now empty landscapes, have long since galloped into the mists of history, their stories now entrusted to the silent stones and the enduring earth. Let the echoes of their empires, their triumphs, and their eventual fading now soften and recede in your mind. There are no more ruins to explore tonight, no more ancient inscriptions to decipher, no more climatic shifts, or fading trade routes to ponder. There is only this moment of deep stillness, this sense of immense time, and the quiet endurance of the land itself. Allow your body to relax, your mind to become as calm and expansive as the star-dusted steppe. Let your breath be as gentle and even as the night breeze, carrying you effortlessly towards the peaceful horizon of sleep, where perhaps in your own dreams you might hear the faintest whisper of those ancient, timeless tales. The deserted settlements of Mongolia, as you've journeyed through in your slumbering imagination, whisper profound and often melancholic tales of time, of impermanence, of mighty empires risen from the steppe grasses, only to eventually return to their embrace, leaving behind silent stones and windswept earthen ramparts. Nature, as you've seen, patiently reclaims these human endeavors, softening their sharp edges, burying their secrets. But even as these ancient sites fade, physically, their spiritual and historical essence, their tales of time, continue to resonate in a very powerful and living way, particularly within the contemporary identity and the enduring spirit of modern Mongolia itself. These are not just dead ruins. They are the very roots of a nation, the ancient heart from which its modern pulse still draws strength. As you now shift your perspective from the distant past to more recent times, you realize that while specific khans and khaganates have vanished, the vast, awe-inspiring landscape of the steppe endures. The nomadic, pastoralist way of life, though evolving, continues to be a vital part of Mongolian culture for many, creating a direct, tangible link to those ancestors who roamed these same grasslands millennia ago. A mainstream historical fact is that modern Mongolian national identity, especially in the post-Soviet era, which saw a resurgence of cultural and historical pride, is deeply and profoundly intertwined with its rich nomadic heritage and its legacy as the fountainhead of great steppe empires, most notably, of course, the empire forged by Genghis Khan. Those deserted settlements, those archaeological sites scattered across the land, are increasingly viewed not just as historical curiosities, but as sacred touchstones to this glorious and formative past. It turns out that having founded the largest contiguous land empire in human history on your national historical resume provides some pretty solid and lasting bragging rights. And those often subtle ruins are like the original, incredibly impressive historical receipts for that unparalleled achievement. The figure of Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan as he's often known in the West, looms immense in the Mongolian consciousness. After decades during the socialist period when his legacy was often downplayed or officially discouraged by Soviet influence, he has reemerged as the paramount national hero, a symbol of Mongolian strength, unity, genius, and global historical significance. Consequently, sites associated with him or the Mongol Empire, even the largely vanished capital of Karakorum, which you visited earlier, are regarded with immense pride and reverence. Archaeological work at Karakorum and public presentations of its history contribute significantly to this renewed sense of national identity, connecting contemporary Mongolians to a past where their ancestors quite literally shaped the destiny of much of the known world. But the connection goes even further back. The Orkhon Valley, that sacred cradle of empires where Karakorum was sited, and where the even earlier Turkic Khans left their magnificent stone inscriptions, is now a UNESCO World Heritage cultural landscape. This international recognition underscores its importance not just for Mongolia, but for all of humanity, as a place that witnessed millennia of interaction between nomadic and sedentary cultures and the rise of successive steppe civilizations. Those ancient deer stones from the Bronze Age with their elegant flying deer and the mysterious Kurigsur burial mounds are also increasingly recognized as markers of an incredibly deep ancestral presence on the land. tangible links to peoples who inhabited these steppes long before the rise of the more famous empires. Even the ruins of those Buddhist monasteries whose often tragic tale of 20th century destruction you pondered now play a complex role in this modern understanding of an ancient heart. While they stand as solemn reminders of a period of cultural loss and political repression, their partial revival and the renewed interest in Mongolia's Buddhist heritage since the 1990s also symbolize cultural resilience and the resurgence of national spiritual traditions that had deep historical roots. Pilgrims once again visit these sites. New temples are sometimes built amidst or near the old ruins, and the chants that were silenced for decades can now be heard again in some valleys. Archaeology itself, the patient quest to uncover and interpret these deserted settlements, has become an important part of this process of national rediscovery. Mongolian archaeologists, often in collaboration with international teams, are constantly making new finds, pushing back the timelines of settlement, and revealing the sophistication and complexity of these ancient steppe cultures. The artifacts they unearth, the tools, the pottery, the art, the ritual objects, are displayed in museums in Ulaanbaatar and elsewhere, becoming tangible points of connection for modern Mongolians to their deep and often glorious past. Their modern tourism slogan could almost be "Mongolia, come for the absolutely breathtaking endless steppes. Stay because you're profoundly moved by the silent windswept grandeur of our many currently deserted but historically extremely significant imperial hangouts and ancestral campsites." And these ancient echoes are not just confined to museums or archaeological sites. They resonate deeply within contemporary Mongolian arts and culture. Traditional music with the haunting melodies of the Morin khor, the horsehead fiddle, and the astonishing vocalizations of throat singing. Kumi often evokes the vastness of the steppe, the rhythm of nomadic life, and the spirit of ancestors. Modern Mongolian painters, sculptors, poets, and filmmakers frequently draw inspiration from the history, the legends, the epic poems, and the very landscapes associated with these ancient sites and the peoples who inhabited them. A quirky and rather beautiful tidbit is the way certain ancient symbols or artistic motifs, originally found on, say, Xiongnu bronze belt buckles, Turkic stone carvings, or Mongol-era imperial seals, are sometimes consciously revived and creatively incorporated into modern Mongolian art, contemporary fashion, national emblems, or even commercial branding, creating a subtle but powerful visual thread linking the distant past with the vibrant present. Of course, this engagement with a glorious, often imperial past also comes with its own complexities and challenges in the modern world. Historians and cultural analysts, both within Mongolia and internationally, continue to engage in thoughtful debate regarding the complex ways in which Mongolia's nomadic imperial heritage, particularly the globally recognized but often controversial figure of Chinggis Khan, is interpreted, represented, and utilized in contemporary nation-building narratives, in educational curricula, and in Mongolia's presentation of itself on the international stage. They explore whether it serves primarily as an inclusive source of unifying national pride and a tool for asserting a unique cultural identity in a globalized world, or if it sometimes carries more complicated historical legacies that require careful, nuanced navigation. But for you, as you stand on the steppe and feel the wind that has blown over these silent stones for centuries, what is undeniable is that these deserted settlements are not truly dead. They are part of a living continuum. They are the ancient heart of a land that has seen empires come and go like the seasons, but whose fundamental spirit, a spirit of resilience, of deep connection to the vast landscape of reverence for ancestors and of an enduring nomadic soul, remains profoundly alive, whispering its timeless tales, not just of what was, but of what continues to be in the heart of modern Mongolia. It's like the entire country is an immense open-air museum, and your modern Mongolian acquaintance might just casually point to a seemingly empty stretch of beautiful rolling grass and say with a quiet smile, "Oh, that particular patch of emptiness, that's where a Khagan who once ruled a very significant portion of Asia probably had his favorite summer palace." No big deal, really. Would you like some more freshly made erag? The ancient heart of Mongolia, as you've now come to feel, beats strongly not just in the vibrant culture and resilient spirit of its contemporary people, but also in the silent, poignant presence of its many deserted settlements. These places, from the faintest traces of a Bronze Age nomadic camp to the crumbling grandeur of an imperial capital or a forgotten monastery, are more than just archaeological sites. They are profound touchstones to a deep and often turbulent past, their stories shaping national identity and whispering lessons of time. But as our journey through these windswept landscapes draws to its final contemplative close for tonight, you might find yourself looking beyond even the human dramas of empires risen and fallen to sense something even more ancient, more fundamental, more enduring, the very soul of the steppe itself. A timeless spirit of the land that has witnessed all, embraced all, and outlasted all. For millennia, before the first Xiongnu chieftain fortified his encampment, before the first Turkic Khan carved his deeds onto stone, before even the earliest herders guided their flocks across these grasslands, the steppe itself existed, vast, untamed, and imbued with a profound, almost palpable spiritual presence. A mainstream historical fact central to understanding the worldview of many of the peoples who have called this land home, from ancient Turks and Mongols to their nomadic ancestors, is the deep veneration of Tengri, the eternal blue sky, as the supreme, overarching deity or spiritual principle, and of Aj or Itugan, the Earth Mother, as the sacred nurturing ground beneath their feet. This was not just a pantheon of nature gods. It was a holistic cosmology that saw the sky above and the earth below as divine sentient entities whose harmony was essential for all life and good fortune. The land itself was not inert matter to be exploited, but a living, breathing being deserving of profound respect. Their ultimate landlord, the eternal blue sky, and their ultimate landlady, Mother Earth, have always had a very long, unbreakable lease on the entire property, and all human settlements, however grand or however humble, have always been, in the grand scheme of things, just rather temporary tenants. Best to keep the place tidy, show proper respect, and always remember to pay your spiritual rent in the form of gratitude and harmonious living. This deep spiritual ecology, this sense of the land itself as sacred and alive, profoundly shaped how people interacted with it, and how they viewed the rise and fall of their own endeavors upon it. The choice of locations for sacred sites, for burial kurgans, for memorial stelae, for monasteries, even for auspicious seasonal encampments, was often dictated by a keen sensitivity to the spiritual energies of particular places. A prominent mountain peak might be seen as a dwelling place of powerful local spirits, or Savdag a conduit to Tengri. A clear, life-giving spring would be revered as a gift from the Earth Mother. Certain ancient trees might be considered sacred anchors in the landscape. To build, to live, to worship in such places was to align oneself with these inherent powers. And when these settlements were eventually deserted, when the human dramas played out and the people moved on or faded into history, the steppe with its enduring soul simply began its slow, patient work of re-embracing them. The wind, seen as a breath of Tengri, would begin to soften the sharp edges of earthen ramparts. The hardy steppe grasses nourished by Mother Earth would creep back over abandoned plazas and into silent courtyards. The rivers themselves, sacred beings, might shift their courses, gently altering the landscape around forgotten riverbank towns. This wasn't necessarily an act of destruction by nature, but rather a quiet, timeless process of reabsorption of the land, taking back its own of human endeavors, finding their ultimate rest within the larger, enduring spiritual fabric of the steppe. It seems the Mongolian steppe throughout its long and storied history has seen it all, done it all, and probably has the ancient, remarkably durable felt t-shirt to prove it. Empires, it seems, are just particularly dramatic, if sometimes rather fleeting, seasons in its timeless existence. The nomadic ethos itself, that way of life so perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the steppe, can be seen as a profound expression of this respect for the land's enduring spirit. The mobility of the herds and the people, the light footprint of the gyr, the seasonal migrations that allowed pastures to recover, all this speaks to a way of living with the land, rather than seeking to permanently dominate or irrevocably alter it. There was an understanding that humans were part of a larger sacred whole, and that their well-being depended on maintaining a harmonious relationship with the sky above and the earth below, and all the spirits that dwelled therein. A quirky and rather beautiful modern echo of this ancient reverence can be seen in the continuing practice of Mongolian people building ovu at mountain passes, or other spiritually significant locations. These are sacred cairns, heaps of stones and branches often adorned with blue silk scarves, Kadag symbolizing the eternal blue sky prayer flags or other small offerings. Travelers will still stop at an Ovu circle at 3 times. Clockwise add their own stone or offering and make a prayer for a safe journey or good fortune. This is a direct living link to that ancient tradition of acknowledging and appeasing the local spirits of the land, a testament to the enduring belief in the steppe's sacred animate soul. Philosophers, ecologists, and scholars of indigenous knowledge systems continue to engage in vital contemporary discussions and debate about how these ancient animistic or tengristic worldviews, with their profound emphasis on a sacred, interconnected environment, and the necessity of living in harmony with natural forces might offer valuable perspectives, ethical frameworks, or even practical models for our modern world, as it grapples with issues of environmental sustainability, ecological conservation, and a more respectful human relationship with the planet. As you stand in your mind's eye on this vast, silent steppe, surrounded by the faint traces of so many forgotten settlements, you begin to feel it. Not just the wind, but something deeper. It's a sense of immense time of countless generations who have lived, loved, fought, worshipped, and dreamed upon this very earth. It's a feeling of the land itself as a vast repository of memory, a silent witness to all the tales of human joy and sorrow, triumph and impermanence. The specific empires may have turned to dust, their grand capitals become mere whispers in the grass. But the spirit of the steppe, that sense of boundless space, of raw natural power, of an overarching cosmic order reflected in the endless sky and the enduring earth, that spirit remains. So if you ever find yourself feeling a little overwhelmed by the fleeting nature of your own human endeavors, or the rapid pace of modern change, just take a moment to imagine the Mongolian steppe. It has calmly watched civilizations rise and then gently fade back into its embrace for thousands upon thousands of years, and it's probably just looking out at the horizon under that eternal blue sky and thinking with a profound and ancient patience, next, the deserted settlements in their final quiet tale remind you that while human stories are written lived, and then often forgotten, the land itself with its deep enduring soul remembers all. Word count 1399. And so, as the vast Mongolian sky begins to darken, and the first stars prick the deep indigo velvet overhead, our journey through its deserted settlements and their whispered tales of time gently comes to a close for tonight. The crumbling earthworks, the silent kurgans, the windswept ruins of ancient capitals and lonely monasteries, all now rest under the immense watchful gaze of the steppe night. Imagine the profound silence of these ancient places, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the hardy grasses or the distant mournful cry of a nocturnal creature. The great Khans, the fierce warriors, the devout monks, the everyday herders who once peopled these now empty landscapes, have long since galloped into the mists of history, their stories now entrusted to the silent stones and the enduring earth. Let the echoes of their empires, their triumphs, and their eventual fading now soften and recede in your mind. There are no more ruins to explore tonight. No more ancient inscriptions to decipher, no more climatic shifts or fading trade routes to ponder. There is only this moment of deep stillness, this sense of immense time, and the quiet endurance of the land itself. Allow your body to relax, your mind to become as calm and expansive as the star-dusted steppe. Let your breath be as gentle and even as the night breeze carrying you effortlessly towards the peaceful horizon of sleep, where perhaps in your own dreams you might hear the faintest whisper of those ancient, timeless tales.